of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated.
Councilmember Totino?
Present.
Supervisor Albro?
Here.
Councilmember Foreman?
Here.
Councilmember Rye?
Here.
All right. Make a motion to accept the agenda as present. Present that as motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Make a motion to accept there's no minutes.
Nope.
Next up is a public hearing for special district benefit unit rolls, 2024. This is a yearly thing. Make a motion to open up the public hearing. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Gabbard, before we go forward, can you let the residents and the audience know what that means, the public?
Sure. Everybody who's in a special district, every property owner, whether it's sewer or water, electric, what have you, or lighting, I should say, receives, in addition to a real property tax, what's called a special benefit assessment. Special benefit assessment is the amount of money that the district needs in order to operate during the year. They assign benefit assessments units to your property. If it's residential, it's a certain amount. If it's commercial, it's another amount. Today is the day that you can come in and say that your property is not properly included in the district, or there should be a diminution because you're not receiving the service, or what have you. It's not an opportunity to challenge the budget that was set for the special district. It's not an opportunity to say that your rate was miscalculated. It's an opportunity to talk about your property in particular and whether or not the special benefit assessment against it should be altered or removed in some manner.
Anybody wish to speak about this? Any board members have any questions? Christian, can you come up for a second? I have a question for you. Good evening. I have a question about apartment complexes. Can you explain to them what benefits they have by not being at?
There you go. Okay.
We had an apartment complex in Glenham that sold for X amount of dollars, and it's assessed for a lower number. Can you explain to me and everybody watching what that meant, why they get that privilege?
Well, it's not necessarily privilege, but I have to determine what I think the market value of that apartment complex is. But I always have to temper that with, I know the way the court systems work. So if someone were to say pay $30 million for a property, that assessment might hold up for a few years, but eventually that apartment complex is going to hire an attorney who's going to bring us to court and say it's not really worth $30 million, they're going to say $3 million. But in reality, when you go to court, there is an established methodology for valuing these properties. Now, these buyers of these properties, most of them are bought up by REITs or hedge funds. They're willing to accept a rate of return of 2%, 3%, and 4%. But when I go to court, I can't use that as my equalization rate. I have to use as my capitalization rate. I'd have to use an equalization rate of more like 7%, 8%, or 9%, which would give it a lower value. So I could say, hey, you just paid $30 million to this apartment complex and hit them with that assessment. But that's not going to hold up in court. So, and I know it's not going to hold up in court. I've been doing this too long I know the game.
Okay.
So, and we go to court and we had to go get a real estate appraisal. That appraiser's not going to come and say, hey, I'm going to use a capitalization rate of 2% and 3% and 4%. I have to use 7%, 8%, or 9%. That's just what the courts are going to accept.
Understood.
So it's and it does happen with certain commercial properties where there's certain investment like REITs and hedge funds are willing to pay large amounts of numbers for these properties because they're willing to accept a lower rate of return. So I find a lot of times you have like hedge funds or REITs, they have hundreds of millions of dollars in cash. Cash doesn't make them any type of a return. So they go to a property and say, well, we'd like to get a 7% or 8% return, but we'll buy it at a 4% return because we've got to start getting some type of return on our millions of dollars on some type of property. And then I guess they hope over time they could raise rents and cut expenses and possibly start to make some more money. But it is a common thing. All of our apartment complexes, even in the town of Wappinger, they have sold for significant numbers. But I have not assessed them there because I know we can't defend those numbers.
Okay.
And if we go to court, we're going to lose, and that ends up with huge refunds that's money that we're budgeting, expecting to get, and then we have to refund it, and we're not going to get that money, so it's a difficult task, but you're going to lose eventually. So
Understood.
I-
Any, Councilman Foreman?
Thank you for being here.
No problem.
Same topic, but different. So, house, single resident house, and this is an education question, is assessed for $350,000. It gets sold for $275,000. Do you immediately change the assessment to $275,000 because there's a sale?
If I think it's a real arm's length sale, then I would do that, yes.
Okay.
So, but that hasn't happened lately.
Yeah.
So, the market has been really, the last several years has
Going-
been crazy.
going in a different
it's
direction.
More, it's more
Bullish.
like it's assessed for $275 and they pay $350 is the situation we've been running into for years now.
Right.
So, but yes, I would look at a property and say, hey, if you're assessed for $300 and you paid $350, maybe your assessment should be $350.
Right.
But if you're assessed for $350 and you pay $275, maybe your assessment should be $275.
Okay.
As long as I think that's not a foreclosure sale, not a distress sale, not a estate sale, a real arm's length transaction where it's exposed on the market and that's the most money that people could get for the property,
Yep.
then that's a real sale. And that you got to look long and hard at the ones that sell for a lot more and the ones that sell for less, and then give people their proper. I mean, all I'm after is fair assessments. So if if your assessment goes up, that's a fair number. If it has to go down, you're getting a fair number. That's all I'm going after.
All right. So I have a second question with these apartment complexes. So the person buys it for $30 million, and you assess it at $20 million. He comes in, he charges $1,000 a month. Now he goes to $1,500 a month. How does that impact the assessed value of the property?
Well, I value these properties based on their income. So obviously, if they're charging more and more rent and getting more income, then I would look at the formula that we use, which would be the gross rental value. So I'd look and say, hey, you have 100 units, they all rent for X amount of dollars. This is your yearly gross and income minus a vacancy and collection loss minus your expenses, and then multiplied by a capitalization rate.
Okay, so where's that,
So
how do you get
if-
that form?
If they're getting more and more money for their units, then obviously the value of their property is going up. And I have been raising the assessments on all of the apartment complexes several years in a row now.
And the formula that you use is the New York State formula for calculation?
It's not necessarily a state formula, but there's a court-accepted methodology, I would say.
So it's a methodology that if you use that and it gets challenged and it ends up going to court, you can defend your end product with,
Right.
essentially by showing them the equation and saying,
Right.
this particular formula is an accepted method by the court.
Well,
And,
the
you
court
know,
wouldn't accept my methodology. The court would demand that we bring in a licensed real estate appraiser or a licensed commercial real estate appraiser, and they would create an appraisal for us on the property. And then we would present that to the court.
So
But
that
I
form-
know what the appraisers are doing, because I'm an appraiser and I've been doing this for
So the
28
formula
years.
that you use that's accepted by the court
Yes.
is based
It's the
on
same-
the
same-
method that the appraisers use
Yes.
to determine value.
Yeah, over time, we've basically come up with this methodology that.
So that
that
you
is
and the
morphed into
appraiser
an
would
approach.
essentially end up reaching approximate
Yes.
values for each,
Yes.
within a certain percentage
Right.
margin of error.
The issue is we'll ask for an appraisal, and the appraiser will come in at X, and then usually the attorney will get an appraiser who will come in significantly less than X, because they want, obviously, to try to, the attorneys work on a commission, so the contingency. So the more money they save them in taxes, they get a percentage of that. So they want their appraisers to come in as low as possible.
So you mentioned a form. What is this form?
There's not a form, I'm saying that there's
Formula.
formula.
No. You said when the rents go up or whatever, there's a formula that you get. How do you know that? How do you
Well,
know?
I try to search out what they're getting for rents in the market. There are lots of online
So an
sources
apartment
you can
complex.
look and see what they're asking for rents on the properties.
I see that.
So-
I want to know,
So
but no one,
Dutchess County also puts out a really good rental survey for the.
but no one sends the assessor in the town of Fishkill any documentation.
do that.
We have to seek it out ourselves.
Yes.
And we do that every year?
So I research as much as I can every year. So
Okay.
we don't require them to supply us with their information.
Understood.
Sometimes you can pass a law that says, goes to all commercial properties and says, you must provide us with certain
What-
information, like income and expense and things like that.
What
And if you
municipality,
fail to provide it, you lose out in court. But
what municipality that you know has that law?
what's that?
What municipality that you know of that has that law?
Many don't.
Do you know of any?
I don't really know of any, no.
Mr. Gabbard, do you know of any that do that?
No, I can't.
So,
Can't cite you any, no.
I think maybe like City of Yonkers might do it, maybe. So there are some places that
I can reach out
require
to the mayor's
them
office.
to provide their information. So,
It's a city, not a town.
Yeah.
Any questions?
but we
from
could
the
look
board?
into it, but I've never been in a town that has it. I don't know of any town in Dutchess County that has it.
Can you see if
So-
any town in New York State has it? Can you
I
find
can
that
do
out?
some research and see what I can find.
Okay,
I'm sure someone has it. I know it's a law on the books somewhere,
okay.
but I don't believe many places do it. It's a big, it's a lot of information you have to collect.
How many apartment
So-
complexes do we have in the town of
Well,
Fishkill?
in theory, well, I guess maybe we could, I don't know if we can do it for just apartment complexes, but usually you go to all the commercial properties, the strip malls, everybody, and say, give us your income and expense for the year. So we know how much you're charging in rents, we know how much your expenses are, and we can use those to value the properties.
Do you know how many apartment complexes we have in the town of Fishkill?
Well, what size?
Over 50.
So over 50, there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, probably at least 5
There's
plus.
7,
7 to some,
more than 7, actually.
so.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Harkins? Thank you, Christian.
Chris,
Talk to you
thanks for
later.
your hard work.
You want to speak about benefit units?
I just got a question for Christian.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so, I'm Kenya Gadsden, taxpayer. You said that there hasn't been any increase in the apartment complexes in terms of the payment in the last couple of years, is that what you said?
No, I said I've been increasing the assessments.
Oh,
every
you've
year.
been increasing it?
Yes, because I've been tracking the rents are going up. I believe the value of these properties is increasing.
Is that information accessible, like to, say, a layperson like myself?
What the assessments are?
Yeah, yeah.
That's all public information.
Okay,
So you can come and see anything you want.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Question about benefit units?
If it's appropriate, I was actually gonna.
Can you go to the
answer a question-
microphone?
I was actually gonna answer a question you had asked.
Okay.
So my name is Ben Surface. I'm a supervising attorney at the Hudson Valley Justice Center. We represent tenants in the Hudson Valley. I'm here to speak on good cause, but there was a question about collecting information of rents.
Okay.
And how municipal.
Speak in the microphone.
Yeah.
Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a question about whether there are municipalities that have passed laws that allow them to collect the data they would need to see if landlords are raising the rents. And I would just use this opportunity to say that the Emergency Tenant Protection Act actually then creates a requirement within the jurisdictions that it's adopted in for them to have landlords to report their rents to the Department of Homes and Community Renewal. And so that is not the bill that's before the council today, but there are municipalities all over the state that have adopted the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, and in so doing, the landlords that fall under that act are actually required to report their rents, and so the towns, where it's in effect, do have access to that data about rents going up.
You said you're an attorney?
Yeah,
And what do you practice?
housing law.
Housing law. Does that include amenity fees?
Amenity fees just in general?
Like some residents have brought up to the attention when they got renewed, all of a sudden they're hit with a $75 amenity fee that they didn't have before, and they don't
Yep.
use those services.
Yep.
Is that proper, or is that, what's your opinion on that?
So those are legal fees that if a lease includes those fees and a tenant signs that lease agreeing to pay those fees for those services, they are legal to be charged, but then they're entitled to that service. If they don't receive that service, then that's a violation of the lease by the landlord, and tenants cannot be evicted for not paying those fees.
So a tenant, when they renew, can say no to the amenity fee and not be charged that legally?
Well, it depends on how their lease is set up. If that term is part of the lease, they would have to refuse to sign that lease unless that charge is removed.
So if we pass this law tonight, that would help citizens that don't want the amenity fees, to help them with their civil rights?
Not directly. It would help them because it would give them leverage to negotiate their lease. Right now, a lot of tenants don't have any leverage when their landlord shows them a lease, and basically their options are sign this and agree to all of these terms, or don't sign it and get out. And so the good cause law, which I'm prepared to speak on it more fully, would give tenants the ability to say, I'm a rent-paying tenant, I've abided by all the terms of the old lease, I'm not interested in paying $75 for a washing machine I don't have,
Yep.
I'm happy to sign a lease when you give me one that reflects that. And that, right now, a landlord could say, you know what, never mind, here's a 90-day notice, please leave. And with the good cause law, they wouldn't be able to do that.
So let me ask you another question. When a large development doesn't make improvements, what is the impact on that?
Of the good cause law?
As a lawyer, how would that
Yeah.
be impacted, yes?
So right now, our only defense, if a tenant wants to hold their landlord accountable for not making repairs or not making needed improvements, basically a tenant has to either sue their landlord for those repairs or withhold the rent, both of which put them in need of both a lawyer and at risk potentially of an eviction for non-payment. What this law does, right, because if the tenant continues to pay their rent and continues to abide by the lease and makes demands of their landlord doesn't have the ability to retaliate by saying, you know, you're causing problems for me, you're calling the Department of Buildings, I don't want to deal with you, here's a 90-day notice, please leave, right? In this case, the landlord can't give them that 90-day notice terminating their tenancy without a reason. And so the tenant can, with a sense of security in their housing, say, I'm going to go to the Department of Buildings. I'm going to go to the Department of Health. There's rats crawling across my kid's bed. You know, these sort of examples are things that I deal with every day. And good cause, what it does is it doesn't change any behavior for landlords that are doing what they would do anyway and properly taking care of their buildings. It's the ones who don't care and see it as cheaper to get rid of a tenant than to fix a unit. That's what this law addresses.
Understood. Okay, so we're going to close this, and we're going to
Yep.
open up the other public hearing. Thank you very much. Christian, thank you very much. Make a motion to close the public hearing on the special district benefit units. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next up is ID number 9614, public hearing, good cause eviction law. Any board member wish to speak before we open it to the public?
Now let the public speak first.
Let's public speak first.
I do.
Mr. Rye, Councilman Rye?
If I may. So I prepared a little document, and I've done a lot of research in this, and I know we have a lot of people that have a lot invested in this as far as time and certainly a desire. Where I'm perplexed at this particular point is that Albany just passed the good cause eviction, GCE, April of 2024. And yes, 10 municipalities have brought it into law. Albany, Kingston, I don't have to tell you, Ithaca, Poughkeepsie, City of Beacon, City of Newburgh, Village of Nyack, City of Hudson, New Paltz Village, Village of Catskill. And I don't know where we understand the effect this may have on a housing shortage that we have in the town of Fishkill. I will say that, if you allow me to digress for a moment, personal commentary, I've been in rental hell myself, situations before where rent is due and you're squeezed and it's horrible. It's nothing more stomach churning, there's no doubt about that. Certainly when I was working to go to college, that was a ill-fated time, and then in the city back in the day, that was pretty horrible. But in a report published by the Dutchess County Department of Planning and Development, which Christian pointed out, it's shown that a vacancy rate exists in the town of Fishkill of 0.9%. That's right now, 0.9%. That means the market is tight. People have very few options with a 5% vacancy rate, as was pointed out to me by Dylan Tuttle, senior planner at the Dutchess County Department of Planning and Development, in a phone conversation after I read a lot of his report. He was saying a 5% vacancy rate, and we have a healthier market for renters. The occupancy rate was taken from the 2023 survey, which has been discussed, from 7 complexes responding, representing 1,800 rental units in the town of Fishkill. It's estimated that the town of Fishkill has 2,980 rental units of all different sizes. That information was extrapolated from the most recent census, so instructed Dylan Tuttle. We seem to have had 3 major periods in Dutchess County, and this shortage is not restricted to Fishkill. It's countywide, it's statewide. But we had peaks in the 70s, 80s, and the early 2000s when there was plenty of building and plenty of options going on. And of course, that's resulted in the town of Fishkill being very upset with traffic, with all the overbuilding, and having been one who has fought different developments, it's for those reasons. For the last 15 years, we have been flat in building new homes and rentals all across the Dutchess County. Reasons for lack of building have been zoning issues, cost of construction, labor. Of the 10 jurisdictions across the Hudson Valley that have enacted the good cause eviction, none enacted it with the knowledge of how the GCE will affect the housing demands in their areas. I'm sure they voted it in for the same reasons there's a desire to do the same here tonight. People are hurting financially, people are scared. As a compassionate individual, I have expressed openly how I have been there more than once and understand. A big part of not building more rentals in town of Fishkill has been our traffic, as I've already stated. And as I've stated, I've been a part of an effort I organized in my home with people and the neighbors to help stop 2 different developments. So, will enacting GCE prevent any person with a vision for developing an affordable housing project be detoured from looking at town of Fishkill? We don't know. I want the town of Fishkill to be a leader in this effort, helping people with options in housing. Are we doing that right thing for the long term or following into a dark cavern of unintended consequences? Between meetings, I had calls with a great deal who are expressing consternation on both sides, as you can imagine, because we have to look at this in a balanced way. Therefore, before we add any possible market pressures and drive headfirst into a possible solution by establishing GCE, I'm proposing that we establish a working group to see if we can develop more comprehensive solution. I'm asking us to just take a pause for 6 months and take a look at what we can do to develop more affordable housing. In our comprehensive plan, we have explore ongoing use of Town Fishkill Affordable Housing Trust Fund for the administration and or establishment of housing programs improvements to promote the creation, expansion, or improvement of affordable housing. So I'm just concerned, this might be an opportunity to do that. If we're paneling a housing committee, including residents, owner, tenants, rental units, realtors, town board, staff, stakeholders of all kinds, that would help give us more information. And I think we're blind right now with the overall information. I think we need to conduct a market analysis, determine the dynamics of what will occur should this be voted in, and use that data to proceed. And potentially, the information we glean, we realize, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and vote the GCE in. And it is the course of action that is the best. But what I've done is I've taken this time to look into, well, if we are going to take a pause, and we are to create a committee, and we are to look at how we can develop affordable housing, how do we take those steps? And certainly in conversations with the county, there is community block grant. We have an opportunity now actually to get involved, which I intend to do, and I invite anybody who wants to participate with me. There's going to be an application workshop sometime in late January 2025. Applications will be due in February. From what I understand now, we won't be able to obtain any resources for anything to do with housing, but we might be able to get a grant for some sidewalks, which would take a little bit of community involvement to see how we could work that out. And if we can get money for that, God knows we need them. That was Paul Hess, Community Development Director, Dutchess County Department of Planning. I've also learned about a program from the state, the New York State Pro Housing and Community Renewal. And at the Housing and Community Renewal, it's all about understanding the nexus between supply and affordability. And that's the important nexus. In order to achieve true equity of opportunity and to erase the gaps in access to health, education, welfare. We must guarantee that people have a choice. I'm taking this from the website, have a choice as to where they live and raise their families. So Governor Hochul in July 23 signed an executive order creating the Pro-Housing Community Program, an innovative policy designed to reward local governments that are working hard to address New York's housing crisis. Now, see, this is where we are in the housing crisis ourselves. We have downstate that wants to put in 1,300 and nobody wants them. I don't want them, but that's a part of the housing crunch. It's all about traffic, which is hideous right now. It's all about expanding our population, increasing that traffic. It's all about putting stresses on a fire department that doesn't exist down there, stresses on our police department, all kinds of things. So where we are is we are at a crossroads in so many different ways. Where do we build affordable housing? How do we go about it? Where would it go? How, you know, I just feel that if we could pause and take a look and inform a committee, and I know that we can establish objectives and approach and develop targets. I think that, and there's many, many steps that I've put together here and working and talking with other people to execute this. But I will tell you that a great individual that could help us with this problem is Mr. Matt Horn, Director of Local Government Services, and Ozzy, if you need the info, I'll give it to you. MRB Group, they're up in Rochester, and they work with communities all the time on finding grants to work on these types of issues. Paul Hess, the Community Development Coordinator, is also, as I've already mentioned, a great individual. That is a great resource going on, and Mr. Dylan Tuttle, Senior Planner, DC Department of Planning and Development, is more than happy to work with us if we develop a committee to help us understand issues and help us identify ways in which we can create affordable housing. This is hard to say take a pause, but I think it's important for us to look at this holistically. And I have a great deal of compassion. I want to go forward with this, but I think that we need to take the time to take a look at this and what options might be, and a little bit of time, I think, is only prudent. And that's my statement.
Thank you, Mr. Rye. You want to say something?
Oh, where do I begin?
Well, hold on a second. All right, John, would you like to say anything?
Not yet.
Okay. Greg?
I thank Mr. Rye for his, the word he likes to use, his dissertation. I'm almost speechless. I mean, we've been discussing this in public for 4 months to suddenly have an epiphany that we need to pump the brakes on the night of a public hearing when the law is on the agenda is a little transparent.
Okay,
Oh,
okay. If
I
you
have
want
the floor,
to,
Mr. Rye, I have
if
the
you are
floor.
going to get personal,
Mr. Rye, I have the floor. I'm
Okay,
responding to
okay.
your personal comments.
no. Here's the thing, Greg, this is some epiphany. That is as tacky as it comes, okay? This is something that I've been working on, and I'm sorry that it didn't meet your time schedule. It's something that did evolve, and it would be remiss of me to, and improper and unprofessional not to bring it forth. So it's perfectly fine. If I brought it up 2 weeks ago, it'd be the same situation.
You know, okay, I'm just going to reclaim the floor, if that's permissible.
Carry on.
We've been discussing tenant protections for some time now. We understand the parameters and the limitations of what we can do based on the scope of New York State's good cause eviction law. It is a great matter of pride to me that my day job is for the Senate Majority Leader who secured the passage of that bill in the state, Andrea Stewart-Cousins. There are any number of concerns surrounding housing right now. Our assessor just spoke about the fact that we are experiencing a continued rate of inflation in housing costs. That's not just for home purchases, it's for rents as well. I know that firsthand. I am a renter in the town of Fishkill. What I make every year is public record. I don't make $100,000 a year, but I make damn close. I am living paycheck to paycheck. That should not be a reality in America. It should not be a reality in New York, and yet it is. I, with the jobs that I have, cannot afford to live on my own. And my fastest route to home ownership will be when my mother dies. Now, I recognize that there are a lot of different interests here, and we need to consider future development in the town, and those points and those contexts that Mr. Rye introduced I think are very valuable to the town, and we should consider working with anyone who can provide further assistance. But this is not a time for committees and discussion and postulation and general hobnobbing. This is time for action. And speaking as a renter, in a room full of people who either rent their units, rent their homes, or have great advocacy for those who do, it is tough to hear a homeowner lecturing the public for 15 minutes as to why he isn't going to protect them.
That is tacky as hell, Greg.
Forgive me, Mr. Rye, but what,
That's just
forgive
as
me,
tacky
Mr. Rye,
as
but
it
what, again,
gets.
I have the floor here.
That's as tacky as it gets. How
Yes,
dare you?
Yes, how dare I offer my
How
opinions
dare
on what
you?
you say and do.
I mean, that is just as, you are going for some sort of emotional points out here. And this is a serious matter that I
Again,
take
how
extremely
dare
seriously.
How
A
dare-
homeowner?
how dare I?
A homeowner that was
How dare
finally
I?
able to buy a home and glad of it, that rented his entire life, okay? You don't know my whole story, and you just sit up here and make an absurd remark like that. I'm not going to sit here and take that.
Brian, I don't need to know your whole story to know your actions now. You've just said them.
I-
I'm not judging your story, I'm judging
My
your
actions-
actions. I have said many
my actions
times
are-
at this
are-
dais,
My actions are something to think about, the timing of which you disagree with. There is nothing wrong with me bringing this up. The tacky way in which you are attacking it and the personal way in which you're attacking it is simplistic grandstanding, and it's beneath you, Greg.
That's it, go on, Greg.
yeah, at this point, I'm feeling like saying less is more. I mean, never stand between your adversary and his own self-destruction. I mean, at this point, I mean, he might as well star in a one-man Broadway show of how to destroy your credibility without really trying.
Are you done?
Almost. I just need to gather my thoughts. It's difficult to keep them all together when you're constantly being interrupted. Forgive me. This is the end product of a long discussion. I think the points which the councilman has made are valid. There is more that the town should do, but the town should not wait to do this until all of the other ducks are in a row. We start here and we do more. I don't think that saying, oh, there's 15 other things to consider. Great, let's consider them and let's adopt this now. That's my position. I'm one last thought before I leave, and this will only take a few seconds. I have received emails from members of the public. Vast majority of them have been in support for this. A few of them have been questions. A few of them have been rather formulaic, copy-paste letters against this proposal. I would be remiss if I did not say that one of those came from the councilman's wife. Now I'm done.
Yeah, she's a realtor, so thanks for dragging her in. What point do you think you just made by doing that? What do you think? Huh?
I've concluded my remarks.
Councilman Foreman, you have any questions?
Just a couple comments. I just want to take a survey. How many people live in Mountain View Garden Apartments? How about Hudson View? Okay. So I am a renter as well. I also lived in Mountain View Apartments for 3 years. And I did a little research myself. And Mountain View Apartments offer 7 different types of apartments. 6 of them are lower in rent than Hudson View Apartments. So I'm not going to speak for Mountain View Apartments. I'm just going to give you my opinion on something. For years, Mountain View Apartments was a family-owned complex. most recently by the Harvey family. And I believe that they kept their rents low, and they took care of business. There was one big happy family there.
Guys,
And
you're gonna be
then,
able to speak in a minute.
and then they sold their complex to a group that owns a whole bunch of different complexes. They sold it for this much money, and here were the rents. The rents are here. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to go here to here, up to market rents. And as many people who have been here for the last few months, who live in Mountain View, they're still lower than Hudson View Apartments.
Guys, you can speak when you
I
get
got
to
it
the
right
podium.
here. So, you know, if this law was such a dynamite law, then the state should have and could have made it a statewide law. But they didn't, and I suspect why, because the senators and assemblymen got pushback not to make it a state law and just leave it in New York City. So I don't see our local town, neighboring towns, Wappinger or East Fishkill, even talking about something like this. And I know we have more apartments than they do, but they do have apartments in those two towns. So I just don't know. That's it. That's all I'm going to say at the moment.
Thank you, Councilman. So I did get a couple letters, so residents took the time to write to me, so I just want to read them real quick. Dear Supervisor, as a resident and business owner in Fishkill, I oppose the good cause eviction. Her name is Dawn Salamone. Similar letter from Miss Sarah Del Mondo. She opposes it. I got her twice. Miss Isabel Alves, she opposes it. I'm a resident of
Yes,
here.
these are what I was referring to.
Same ones, the
Well,
former?
they are identical letters with different signature columns, so it is a copy paste. So if you've read one into the record or have one saved,
Okay.
the others are
And then,
identical to
I
it.
got a letter from Emma Stevens, she's for it. And if I missed somebody, I apologize. I also spoke with Mr. Silver, who owns Hudson View Park. We had a good conversation. He understands if it happens, it doesn't, so I listened to his concerns too. Mr. Gabler, before the residents speak, can you just give us an update on the, with how what this is going to impact and what people over one unit, explain that one unit. If somebody has one apartment, this doesn't include them. I want to make sure that's clear.
Well, if you are a landlord in a building with less than 10 units,
Okay.
then you would not be, you'd be exempt from the law. And if you are the owner of a single housing accommodation, you're likewise exempt from the law. But all other renters are subject to it. The good cause eviction law, as New York State wrote it, is an opt-in law. It's not something that municipalities can take into their own hands and draft up. You either accept most of the terms or you don't. That's pretty much it. Now, there are two areas in which a municipality, and that's exactly what this law does, by the way. It basically just says that the town is opting into the state law. But there are two areas where municipalities have discretion to make their own changes as far as these points go. One of them is the luxury apartments, and there is a percentage above market rate which is exempt. We have, for this law, taken 345% of fair market value, which is in line with what all the other municipalities, I think except Kingston, have done as far as their luxury apartment rates. The other is the definition of a small landlord. Now, the state statute suggests, it's written into it, that the definition of a small landlord should be a landlord who owns less than 10 units, whether individually or in a single building, of rental units. There are some people who would like to see that brought down to 1 unit. The town has made, at least in this draft law that's being considered tonight, 1 housing accommodation, which means 1 building. You can have more than 1 unit in it, but you'd still be exempt for that 1 building. But other than those 2 changes, the law goes forward exactly as under state law. So There's a provision, as we've already heard discussed, preventing eviction of tenants other than for good cause. There's a provision which caps rental increases at 10% at the most, and it's a combination otherwise, if you're going to go less, of 5% plus the annual change in the consumer price index. So you add those two together, and that would be the other arrangement for coming up with the amount of rent that you can increase. It is, however, a soft cap. That is to say that if a landlord incurs costs which would justify a greater raise than 10%, they can raise the rent higher. However, they do have to justify that increase in cost by showing that they've made repairs, whether it's HVAC or structural, capital investments in it, whatever, in order to have the rent go higher. I think that's a pretty good summary of the terms. There's,
Very good.
you know,
Quick question for Mr. Gaba.
Yep.
So the effective date, this local law will take effect immediately upon filing in the office of the Secretary of State in Albany. What's the time frame? If this law was passed tonight, what's the time frame?
well, the Secretary of State's generally pretty quick. Sometimes they get backed up. I think you're probably looking at, by the time it gets written up and handed in about 3 weeks, maybe a month tops.
Do you see the apartment complexes increasing their rates in between?
Well, if it's an annual rent, I think they'd be hard pressed to say we're going to suddenly do it. I mean,
You're thinking the apartment guys are going to raise the rents prior to
date
this?
to date, you see.
That's my question.
But that would have to fall when someone's lease expires.
Yeah.
So anybody that expires within 6 weeks could theoretically, that'd be bad optics for them to do
If
that.
you're concerned about the gap, we'd certainly FedEx it up to Albany. We can't make the Secretary of State
We could do
report it
that.
any faster than we can get it
I'll have you
there.
drive it up there.
You can drive it up. But all you can do is deliver it to them. They have to actually file it.
Mr. Gaba, I do have one question for you. We've spoken about it briefly. I know that it is sort of, I don't want to say a can of worms, but it's a separate topic that is related to this. If this law were to be enacted tonight, we would need to, from an enforcement standpoint, take a look at what can be done about overseeing units that will be LLC managed for the purpose of circumventing the law. And is that something that you would be able to work with us on in the future if this is adopted now, in the spirit of, as Mr. Rye was pointing out, making sure that there aren't unintended consequences, that we can stay on top of this and keep this as an important issue?
Yeah, the law is self-executing. It's not something that the town oversees. Once the law is enacted, the main impact of it is if a landlord goes to court and attempts to get an eviction, he has to lay out that the notices have been given as far as good cause eviction. He has to lay out what the increase in the rent is. He has to detail the reasons why an eviction is being sought, whether the tenant destroyed property or was engaging in illegal activity or what have you. And if they can't make that showing, then they're not going to get a judgment from the justice court. But once the town enacts this law, the town's engagement with it is pretty much over.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification. And to be clear, the process that you just referred to, where the burden will then be placed upon the landlord to establish cause, if we don't adopt this tonight, or we were to pump the brakes on it for 6 months, as has been suggested, until that happens, residents are completely devoid of that protection.
Well, yeah, if the law's not in effect, then its terms wouldn't apply.
Okay, just
Very good. Okay, there's,
Can I ask one more question? Failure to agree to reasonable changes in a lease. There's a list of reasons you can evict, and I never understood failure to agree to reasonable changes in a lease. How is that a reason to evict someone?
Well, we already talked about the, what is it, amenities? Was that the term?
amenities.
Charges that are put into a lease. If a landlord comes to you and says, listen, we just put in a new croquet court, a new tennis table, a new what have you.
Wi-Fi for 75.
Wi-Fi, whatever it is, and we're going to charge you this amount, and it's a reasonable amount.
Okay, I
And you
get
say, I'm not going to pay that, you got a problem. If a landlord comes to you and says it's going to be $300 a month more for these things, it's not a reasonable change to your
Right.
lease, and you could say, no, I'm not going to do
I got
that.
Okay, a lot of people here. All right, well, all right, Kenya.
Kenya Gadsden.
Well, I didn't,
Okay,
hold
go.
up, Kenya, hold up. So anybody that watches our town board meetings, I do not have a time limit. But please, if somebody already said something, make it quick. All right? So just to define who you are and where you're from, and Ms. Gadsden, you're number one.
I'm Kenya Gadsden. I am a former town council member. I'm someone that sat before this board and in the last few months and listened to people who I felt were attentive to what they were hearing from the people. I am saddened, right, that I have to point out people today because that is not what I do, but I do provide the facts related to the information that I have. So, Councilman Rye, I am disappointed, but expected your behavior tonight. And I am saddened because you sat before us, told us the story about your son and your granddaughter and their ability to live on their own without thinking about the consequences of having a wife who sits on the other side of this scale. And so when we act, we must be mindful of what the impact will be. You, to us, are the public servants here to protect, guide, and enforce the law, right? And get guidance from the attorney as you need it. What you presented, in my opinion, is a spiel that was crafted by people who have interest in it remaining an issue not addressed. And because, don't interrupt me, we can't do the Kenya what we did to Greg, okay? So what I am finding is that you are very inconsistent. And you have been that since I've come off the board, but you have backed up into a place where you are appropriate and professional, so I have not addressed you. But for the people who live here in Fishkill, they need to be mindful, and I will continue to now remind them of the inconsistencies of the leadership of the people that we put in these seats. Your seat, to me, is very shaky because your stand-up, your follow-through, and your consistency, in my opinion, is outrageous. It's disgusting. So, Mr. Foreman, I never got on you either, even though everybody says you don't live here, you never produced the lease here, you, for the first time in, is that fan for me or just fan in general? Don't fan me, sir. Don't fan me, little girl. Don't fan me, okay? Little girl, don't fan me, okay? So, Mr. Foreman, who always presents himself, people pay attention, as someone who advocates and promotes Beacon in the most critical case, he leaves Beacon off. Beacon is a spearhead behind Kingston in this law, but he conveniently left it out today. I want y'all to know who he is. You understand me? Because if you won't take the time to sit home and not vote in elections, this is what you have as the representative to take care of you. Somebody who's been accused since he got on the board of not living here. Somebody who we have evidence that he used his brother's address to come and run in this town. We have proof of this. You understand me? So I want y'all to know who's before you. So of course he doesn't care about this law because he don't really live here. You understand me? When he got arrested, fake arrested, for stealing a lawn sign, he took them to his residence. That's what he said. Those 38 lawn signs are at my house. He did not take them to Fishkill, where he's allegedly rents from. So he's making a decision tonight on something that is critical to all of you who sit here and those who are at home. And I know some of you don't agree with this law, and you have a right to that, right? Because I'm not disrespecting your right to have your opinion and your guidance. But for those of you who want this to go into effect, these two people, one who flip-flopped and one who has been flip-flopping forever, are making a decision. So I want y'all to pay attention to that. And when it's time to vote, you better make sure you make the right decision. The people who are for you, the people who understand you, the people who sometimes got to say no to your stuff because they don't, it's not feasible at this time, but most of the time they accommodate what you're asking for. This law is critical. This law is critical in my opinion. I know people in Fishkill who their rent went up $700 a month, and then they turned around and put it up another $700 a month. You understand me? And they could not afford to live here anymore. These are working class people with very good salaries, but they couldn't do it. They are renters, legit with actual leases. I have senior citizens who will tell me that they will choose between eating or their medication. You understand me? So my life story is real stories in these streets. My husband and I, fortunately, were able to buy our house in 2007. You understand me? And so we stand on that. And what we say to each other every day is that in the event that we had to rent somewhere, we would be scared. Because our whim is at the whim of the landlord. You understand me? Fishkill, if you know anything about it, has abused affordable housing for years. They have allowed affordable housing to be bought back by the builders. That's why we have little to none. You understand me? There are some that are on this list, Christian can speak to it, and there are some, because I do my own research, that are not on this list, but they are supposed to be on this list. Yes, Governor Hochul said that we must do affordable housing in Fishkill. I believe it was 1,100, I believe it's down to 800 plus. Let's speak facts to the people. Let's stop using scare tactics to make people worried. It is unfortunate that we use discrimination when we say, if you live in Mountain View, your rent was low, and others is up here. And so your rent has to meet here. Let me say this to you. It was low, and it should take its time because people's pockets are not going to be as increased as the rent is demanding at that moment. And so what you then cause is people to be homeless. Now, can I blame the owner? I cannot. But what I can do is point out that Mr. Rye and Mr. Foreman, you both should be ashamed of yourselves. And thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. My name is Sandy Stratton Gonzalez. I live in Fishkill. I moved up here from the city of New York in 2018. I'm a homeowner. Privileged at the tender age of 65 to buy my first home. Yes. So I have a lot of understanding of both sides, but I'm here to speak for my neighbors. I have two beautiful families who have been relocated from my community because of rental increases, with children who were desperate to find another rental situation in their school district. One family with a child with disabilities. These people deserve some sense of security in their housing. Communities deserve some sense of security, and schools benefit from that level of security, of knowing who's in the classroom and not having a lot of movement during the school year. I believe it is disingenuous to link this work, of this affordable housing and the good cause eviction legislation with the need for planning for affordable housing. Of course we need to plan for affordable housing.
Absolutely.
Of course we need to deal with transportation and infrastructure and fire and schools. But that should never stop us from supporting the people who are currently living in apartments and getting priced out. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a little bit short for this microphone. Okay, those are going to be two really difficult acts to follow, but I'm going to keep this as short as I can, but to the point. As a social worker,
You gotta tell me your name and where you
please.
live.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tara Chapa. I live in Hudson View Park Apartments in Beacon. I want to address
Fishkill. You live in
Fishkill.
town.
We
You live in
have
town.
a Beacon
It's
mailing
a zip
address.
code, but
Yes, it's a
Fishkill is
Beacon.
your
Yes,
town.
but when we call for the police, Fishkill comes. My
So that's
mistake.
where you live.
So, a couple of things I want to address. There were some questions that went on here with one of them. You had mentioned some statistics about vacancies, and how, oh my gosh, we have no vacancies in Fishkill. As a social worker, I want to give a quick explanation to why that is. COVID-19. I'm not talking about what end of the mask or no mask or vax you were on during COVID-19. New York State shut down longer and harder than any other state in the union, except for the state of California. The economic disparity that happened in New York post-COVID was almost the greatest in this entire country. It is going to take us longer to come back from that. We have people that were out of work, including myself, for almost a year and sought work in another state. Some could, some couldn't. What happened during that time was that people fell behind on their rent, and there was a magic thing where you didn't have to pay your rent for a certain amount of time. However, 30 days after, when the state reopened again, we were dealing with a community of people that were living off their savings and owed 6, 7, or 8 months in back rent. Some of those people are still trying to catch up on our lives. We live in a state where toothpaste is locked up at the Dollar General because people are stealing it out of need, not out of maliciousness, because brushing your teeth shouldn't cost $6 a tube of toothpaste. Why do we have no vacancies here? Because those are the people that were pushed out of the homes and foreclosed on the homes that they own. So that's an explanation a little bit of why we ended up having so much lack of vacancy. Second, we've all been to beautiful downtown Beacon. I love Long Dock Park. I do a lot of training there myself. There's the whole Fjord Trail project. That's a separate issue. What that is bringing up is it brought up Beacon, but in the same way, it brought in, and this is our neighboring town, in a city, so this does affect us. It brought in from New York City people with much higher incomes. If you look at those studio apartments along the river, they are costing, some of those condos are $300,000. They're more than houses on the other side of the tracks. But what that did is that attraction and the combination of COVID-19, which brought a lot of people out of the city and into Saugerties, the Catskills, this part of New York, the Poconos, anywhere they could go because they're working remotely and they didn't want to live in New York anymore. That caused a situation where you can now build houses and condos in Beacon and charge people $400,000. So now we're trying to meet that in the neighboring towns. As a board of elected officials, you were not elected by those people in New York City that are looking for housing in 6 months, in 7 months, in 8 months, in development. That's a rider that you're trying to tack onto this bill or this law. You were elected by these people.
That's right.
You were elected by us. You were elected by the indigenous people of Dutchess County, the indigenous people of Fishkill, people who laid their roots down here, people who grew up here, people who went to school here. I'm not done. I was just making sure that I wasn't interrupting you.
No.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure that you could still hear what I said.
What I said to the councilman was, I'm a local boy. I like to keep the local people here.
Yes, no, that's okay, but please share. Please share. I would love that to be brought into it. So we are the indigenous people. We are getting priced out of where we live. As somebody who frequents Mount Beacon a lot for my training as the 2021 Ultra World Champion for Spartan, somebody who ran 24 hours in a row to become the world champion, that happened because I run up and down that mountain 6, 7 hours at a time. What I witnessed on that mountain since New York City people have come up here during COVID, the amount of garbage we pick up, the amount of people, it's not everybody. It's not everybody, but it's bringing in influx. That influences the price cap going on in the areas around us. But to bring that back to this current housing, you had brought something up that I think is very important, and you had asked this gentleman over here about what happens if, how long after it signs does it go into effect, and what happens if we wait 6 months. Who does that affect? That affects me. I am a victim of Hudson View Park Apartments. I'm sure you had a conversation with David Silver, and I'm sure that 50% of what he said was a lie because I live there. I've lived there for 17 years. This gentleman over here has lived across from me for 10 years. The people that, they gave you a fact sheet. They gave you a
No,
sheet
I
of, you gathered the rent information from them, okay?
No, this is,
I have the rent information.
Right, oh, I'm sorry, you did, you had the rent information. Okay, just to
I'll
clarify,
tell you what he told me. I spoke to him about 20 minutes, and he told me that he averages his rent increases 2 to 4% a year.
untrue.
Okay.
I tell you that, I lived there for 17 years.
This
but
is all I got. I don't
But
have
I
to
know,
hear
but
that.
I want to explain that, if you'll give me an opportunity to explain that. So here's what I was a victim of. I lived there for 17 years. I never paid my rent a day late or a dime short, even during COVID, even when I had to haul myself 2.5 hours away out of state to find work to be able to pay that rent. I paid it. All of a sudden, 3 years ago, people who had lived there for a long time started getting notices that they were going to have rent renewal inspections. Who got these rent renewal inspections? I asked, and this is what I was told in writing, quote, people we think whose apartments we need to inspect. The inspections included a bunch of illegal things and bogus information. I was told that a fire marshal had walked through my house and told me that my Ironman bike being in the living room was a fire hazard. I said, well, that's not true, because it is illegal for a fire marshal from the fire department to randomly come into somebody's space without informing them, and I have Ring cameras. So next, what is your next issue? Oh, you have a rug over here, and this is a hazard for wiping your feet, and then the next time they came, there's a spot on your carpet. Well, that's because you told me I had to move the rug. In essence, it was bullying. I had to get the Hudson Valley Justice Center, who I qualified for their help, to come in. Once I had a representative, I started CCing them on every email to the landlord, very formal emails that they guided me through. A little bit of the bullying stopped. Now, how does that affect me? My lease inspection is Friday. Okay, that's 2 years ago, when they did my lease inspection after 14 years of having a full year lease, they gave me a 6-month lease so that in 6 months, they could renew it again and bang me for another raise. They're playing games, and I know it looks good on paper. Well, they can only raise, I know he told you they only raise 2 to 4%. Did he fail to mention the part about how the people who had lived there, who had been getting full year leases, were suddenly getting 6-month leases so that they could be raised 8% a year? No, he didn't tell you that part. Did he tell you the part about how they brought people up from New York City to the rental office? They raised our amenity fees. Here's what they did. They renovated the office with bulletproof glass for their COVID fears. We have not seen any of that. I just spent a half an hour using spray kill on my ceiling for the inspection, because if I mention to them that the water stains on my ceiling and I'm on the top floor, if I mention that to them, they will tell me, well, we have to move you out to another unit, but you're not allowed to look at that unit until you move into it. And you have 24 hours to move your stuff out of that unit to another apartment. Again, an apartment that you're not allowed to look at, because we have to fix the roof. And then we're gonna renovate your apartment and raise the rent by this much. And how do I know that? Because the people that live underneath me live in the exact same square footage as I do, the exact same footprint that I do. I pay $1,765 a month, they pay $2,500 a month. They want me out so they can do, and you can do the math, that's not a 2% increase. So it's not just about protecting the next lease and the next lease and the next lease. It's about them pushing out the local residents to raise the rent by $600, $700, $800, $900 to find bogus reasons to do it, or to play the game where they do every 6 months so they can raise it even more. So when you vote on this, you're representing these people, not the people that you want to talk about. Affordable housing, as a social worker, I agree with affordable housing. That is another rider, that is another issue, that is something for another day. Pushing this aside, using buzzwords to push it aside, that doesn't help. So that's all I'm going to have to say about that as the sister of a representative in the, oh, I'm not going to say who this person is, but in the state of Maryland, a state representative. As the daughter of a retired politician that trumps all of where you sit, I am appalled at what just happened here. I was taught politics and government since the day I could speak. Family vacations were go see the Lincoln Memorial, go learn about government. Okay, this is what I was raised in. Okay, I was campaigning for my own father door to door when I was 7 years old. Okay, but what I want to know right now is, If the actions and the way a floor is supposed to be handled would get you kicked out of the United Nations as a representative, why is it okay to do that in the town of Fishkill? I don't know, but I hope the next time I attend a board meeting that it won't be conducted with that kind of behavior.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's, like I said earlier, I don't have a time limit. We're already at past 8 o'clock, an hour on this. Please, as quick as possible. Not you, everybody.
Arnold Estivo, 30-year resident, town of Fishkill. And I know a lot of people here are not aware, there are tenant protections. The Safe Harbor and Tenant Protection Act covers a lot of things such as evictions, tenant renewals, and so on and so forth.
Speaking to Mike.
So to go back to this, it's presented, good cause eviction is presented as a solution to greedy landlords taking advantage of pinched renters in static housing markets. As proponents argue that lowering a landlord's profits by limiting rents to ration a constrained housing supply. The problem with good cause eviction is that it addresses the problems rooted in regulations with more regulations. Housing cannot become affordable without more becoming available. Let's look at the basic components of good housing, the good cause eviction. There's two major components: lifetime tenancy and rent control. Lifetime tenancy hinders the mobility in a rental market and hinders the diversity of our communities. It makes it harder to find apartment. Cities that have implemented lifetime tenancy see substantial declines in the availability in rental housing. There is a report that was done in San Francisco that would prove that. Locking people into existing rental units leaves many renters in apartments much larger or much smaller than they would prefer. Now, in the rent control portion of this, rent control benefits the incumbent tenants at the expense of migrants and people looking to relocate into our town. In New York City, where tenants have disproportionately benefited relative to Black and Hispanic tenants, and landlords have given preference to older and childless households. Many of rent control benefits typically flow to higher income households, even as rent controls drives up rents for everyone else. Rent control also degrades the quality of its beneficiaries' housing. It reduces investment in the property's quality and causes the town's housing stock or city's housing stock to decay. By suppressing property values through rent control, it will reduce the tax revenues in municipalities, hindering their ability to provide essential services. The reality is good cause eviction is that renters that are experiencing poverty are generally older, long-term renters who are less likely to have young children living in a home and less likely to benefit from the integration of their neighborhoods. This is an apparent conflict with the welcoming goals of our more progressive town board. Thus, if we think that integration is desirable because it helps children of the working class and people experiencing poverty, the incumbency advantage of lifetime tenancy and rent control is a weak tool to achieve that objective. History has shown that rent-stabilized apartments appear disproportionately white in New York City, which suggests that the market with shortages of affordable apartments may not be allocated to the neediest applicants. In addition, rent control apartments incentivize incumbents to remain in their current apartments instead of moving. Rent control also strongly biases toward older persons and against young families with children who are just looking to move into our town. When landlords are limited to their ability to raise rent and cannot freely manage their tenancy, they will be extremely careful of who they rent to and who they let in. And that was experienced, that trend has started with the Safe Harbor and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. And with that significant adverse effect on the ability of low-income people to find rental housing, as an example, I should interrupt myself here. Europe has had such limitations for years, and qualifying for a rental property there is not easy. Europe also similarly requires a good cause before terminating an employee, as an example. Thus, this will result in fewer layoffs and lower unemployment. But instead, it had the opposite effect. It's harder to fire someone, and the more cautious employers are in hiring new employees. The same concept applies to housing. You know, our elected officials would rather use this crisis to pass pet progressive policies rather than address the root causes with real solutions. If the town's governor's goal is to maintain and limit the mobility of its residency within the town, then the good cause eviction will ensure the achievement of that goal.
Arnold, can you wait a second? What is the, did you say safe harbor? What was that?
Safe Harbor and Tenant Protection Act of 2019.
What is that?
Well, what it does is...
I'm asking,
It gives tenants certain rights.
where is that?
It gives tenants certain rights, correct?
Yes, it's a process. Instead of in the past a 5-day notice to cure and then a 14-day and then you go to court, now it's 5 days. You got to notify them by the 5th by certified mail. Then you have to wait a few days. Then you got a 14-day notice to cure. Then you have to apply for a court date no less than 12 days before the court, no more than 17 days. Then when you go to court, there's an automatic 2-week recess or a resetting of the court date, and then you go through the whole process. And then through that whole thing, if on the day the sheriff shows up and they provide every penny owed to the landlord, the entire eviction is thrown out.
All right. Oh, Mr. Estivo,
Yes.
you made reference to the existence of good cause eviction in Europe and...
No, in good cause with the employers.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
glad for the clarification there
Yeah.
because I do know a bit about housing in other nations and nations that have protections for tenants in Europe. In Germany, the homeless population is 0.37%. In the Netherlands, it's 0.18%. In Denmark, it's 0.1%. It is orders of magnitude worse than that here. Do you think there's a correlation between that at all?
You don't have to go very far. You don't even have to go to Europe. You can go right to Kingston and see the effects of it.
Yeah,
You know,
all right,
there was
that's
a
enough.
46-unit
Mr. Restivo, thank you.
housing
We're good.
development that was pulled.
We're good. Sir, the attorney?
Yeah. I'll try to do a better job speaking into the mic. So I initially just wanted to clarify. So the Tenant Dignity and Safe Harbor Act, which was passed during the pandemic, is no longer in effect. So what I believe that gentleman was referring to is the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act that was passed in 2019, which amended the pre-existing laws statewide to lengthen certain notice periods for tenants, but didn't impose any protections against eviction without cause. So I guess I'll again say who I am. So I'm an attorney with the Hudson Valley Justice Center. I represent tenants throughout Dutchess, Orange, Ulster, Putnam, Westchester, Sullivan counties.
Your name, sir?
My name is Ben Surface.
You have a business card?
I do. I actually have written testimony that I was hoping
Okay.
to
I'd like
provide
to have
that
it.
has my business card attached to it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
So are you working, in any of the towns where this has been passed?
Yeah.
So,
Are you working with anybody,
yes.
you know, in the town? Okay.
Yeah, so
So,
I
let me-
personally,
Let me,
okay.
one
yeah.
second. I'm just curious how, you know, and I'm very, very curious about this. What have you seen, because I've heard stories and having been in that situation myself of landlord abuses, how have you seen this to help people in those communities where it has been put in place?
Yeah.
And have you any information on the flip side of how it may have hindered any sort of new apartment buildings? Just anything that you have to offer.
No, I appreciate that. So when it comes to how it helps, the biggest thing we see, so I work in, my office is in Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie opted into this law in July or June. June. And since then, what we've seen is
July.
I knew it was either June 18th or July 18th. We've seen a drop off in filings. There are fewer evictions. But prior to enactment of this law, we always have seen that the vast majority of eviction proceedings are for non-payment of rent. Those are still there. Those people not paying rent is not a cause for eviction that this law prevents in any way. Those cases still come across my desk, and I still evaluate them in the exact same way. The cases that I don't see anymore are for the tenant who paid all the rent, abided by every term in the lease, and the landlord said, it's been lovely, but hit the bricks. And so those cases just don't get filed. And we see that day in and day out in the number of filings in the city of Poughkeepsie. The second impact that we see that's positive is that tenants have bargaining power when it comes time to negotiate a lease. So I don't just work with tenants once they're in court. I also advise tenants. Our staff works with tenants who are negotiating lease renewals. And what we see is that prior to this law, tenants in Poughkeepsie, if they were offered a lease in an apartment that they wanted to stay, they would come to us with a bunch of concerns, and we would say, I get your concerns. There's nothing illegal about this clause. If you want to stay in this apartment, you just got to eat it. And that would be clauses like paying for cable that they might not actually use. That would be clauses like, having to pay for parking even though they don't have a car, right? And those kind of things we can now tell a tenant with confidence, you can actually refuse to sign this and you don't have to worry that 3 months from now you're going to have to be gone. So it's changed some of the calculus for landlords in coming to the table actually to negotiate with tenants. And then the third big impact I've talked about a little bit is the ability of tenants to demand improvement in their housing standards without fear of retribution. I know you're schooled in this very well. We heard great testimony from a lady here. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I forgot your name. Tara. Are you seeing people do 6 months leases? Is that, and they're trying to move people out and kick people around and do this crap? I mean, are you seeing that this prevents that where it is established and on the books in those towns? Can they not do 6 months leases? No, they absolutely can.
They can?
Yeah, so this law is not going to prevent a landlord from, if they have a business practice that they want to attempt to see through in which they only offer 6-month leases and they raise the rent 9-10% on each of those leases, they can continue to try to do that.
Twice a year they can do that.
Yep, so there's nothing, one of the things that the gentleman before me brought up was that this was rent control and lifelong tenancies. And as a tenant advocate, there's part of me that wishes it was, but it's just not. It's not rent control, right? If a landlord wants to make capital investments in their property and then wants to raise the rent by 20% because of those costs they laid out, this law says they can do that. Right. All they're going to have to do is show the judge, put out their books saying that that's why they're raising the rent. This is not a lifelong tenancy. Any tenant who wants to leave a good cause apartment is more than free to do so. And any tenant who does any of the 11 things that would be good cause for eviction does not have a lifelong tenancy.
So if someone says, I'm giving you a 6-month lease and I'm raising it 10%, or whatever the law allows,
right.
And they also, if this was enacted, can they tell you, oh, by the way, at the end of this, you're going to have to move into another apartment?
No.
Or is this going to prevent that kind of action and activity?
Yeah, so what this law would do is basically if a tenant doesn't want to sign that new lease under those new terms, they could refuse to do so, and their tenancy would continue under their previous lease on a month-to-month interval. And then the landlord would have to decide whether they want to keep that tenant, maybe renegotiate the lease, or try and prove to the court that the tenant was being unreasonable in refusing the new lease terms, and that the rent increase they wanted to impose was reasonable in light of their costs. So if a landlord can do that and say, look, I do 6-month leases for this reason, we've had a lot of people who don't stay, they break their leases, we have a policy of doing 6-month leases, the judge might say, nothing wrong with a 6-month lease. That's reasonable. Tenant, if you don't want to live someplace with 6-month leases, you have to move. But that's going to be up to a judge, and it's going to be a conversation that a tenant has a bit more equity in negotiating with their landlord.
So there is still some protection with this type of thing with the
Yeah.
tenant. And
Yeah.
even though there are shenanigans going on,
Right.
and
What it really
I'm
changed.
68, so I use shenanigans.
Yeah, yeah. No, I use shenanigans too. So what does that say about me? But what I say is this turns from something where a landlord could say, take it or leave it, to something that's a conversation. It's a conversation that ideally happens outside of the court. But if it breaks down, then it gets to happen with a neutral arbiter involved. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, just addressing the market rent issue. You know, there was a comparison you made, sir, to Mountain View versus Hudson View, and that previously there was a family business that kept rents low for tenants. And what I always talk about is, I know that there are those kind of landlords out there. There are good landlords out there. I just don't run into them in the work that I do because they don't unreasonably raise the rent and they don't kick people out for no reason. And now there's a hedge fund or a large corporation that's purchased that property, and their narrative is they're trying to catch up to market rent. And I respect that narrative, but I want to put it in the context of some real numbers. So fair market rent in Dutchess County, according to HUD, who puts out these numbers, for a one-bedroom is $1,500. Mountain View Apartments currently have a waiting list for their one-bedrooms that are charging $1,825. So Mountain View may be trying to catch up to Hudson View, but they're both above market rent. And so what we're seeing here is that tenants are being forced to choose between unaffordable options. And what this law doesn't do, this law doesn't say those rents got to go down. It just means they got to raise them a little bit slower. And honestly, if they're actually doing 2% and 4% increases, they don't have to do anything different.
Correct.
All this law says is, in order to be seen as reasonable, the rent has to be less than, for Dutchess County, 8.45%, which for somebody who's paying $2,000 a month for a two-bedroom, it's a lot of money. That's a big rent increase. And so what we say on the tenant side is, this law is powerful for tenants, but it's actually a very light touch on landlords. The landlords who are conducting business in good faith will feel very little effect because they're already doing this. And what this does is take the corporate landlords and the exploitative landlords and hold them to a very, what we feel, reasonable standard.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm happy to share.
Give it to me.
Mr. Supervisor, before we move on, I have a question for the attorney.
Yes.
Mr. Gaba, just a question before we move on to further comments. Based on what has just been stated, would it be possible for us to amend the local law to establish that the CPI plus 5% or 10% rental increase should be applicable over the course of a 12-month period and not over the term of a lease, just to prevent that type of exploitative, divide the lease in half and double your rental increase?
I was under the impression that it was annual, and it wasn't, it couldn't be, you had month-to-month leases and you raised it every time that the month was up. But if it is, I gotta tell you, there's nothing in the state law which either prohibits or allows that type of change to be made. So it's something I'd have to look into. We would have to revise the text in any event, if that's what you want to add to it.
Well, then perhaps if we adopt it this evening, we could amend it in the
Yes,
future based on your guidance.
Yes.
And I would, in the spirit of sort of candor to the tribunal, I would caution the town against engaging in any further amendments. One of the benefits of this law that is different from the Emergency Tenant Protection Act is that choosing to opt in is not something that the town can be sued over. But running into preemption of state law issues is. And so we have seen across the Hudson Valley that when municipalities attempt to adopt Emergency Tenant Protection Act, they face stiff litigation and expensive litigation from landlord groups. That is something you are insulated from with this act as long as you only tinker with the small landlord definition and the luxury deregulation definition. And so we are my job will be to enforce this law for you by representing tenants. And I am sensitive to the fact that towns having to then also go to court to fight landlord lobbyists in Supreme Court is an expensive ask.
So Ben, are you saying that we shouldn't amend that to having a lease every 6 months to having 12-month offerings only? We should not do, is that what you're saying?
I don't want to be definitive in giving legal advice. My
We do have an attorney.
Right, no, I know. And
We don't want to offend
Don't
him.
mean to
No.
cut off, but yeah, let me earn my pay here.
Yeah.
Prior to the enactment of the good cause eviction law, I believe 5 municipalities in the state enacted essentially good cause eviction laws, and every one of them was struck down by the state courts on the ground of preemption. So the issue here with the now statutory good cause eviction local law is, as long as you conform to what the state has said you can enact, you should be safe from the litigation that struck down those prior laws. If you venture outside of it and make more changes than are specifically allowed, you're at risk of a legal challenge.
So you're basically saying that 6-month thing would be something that the state legislature would have to define?
It would certainly take you off the hook as far as possible lawsuits go.
rather
Like
go
I
that
said, it doesn't say in the law one way or the other as to whether, it doesn't say anything about that. I was under the impression that it was annual as far as the
Yeah.
increases go.
I
So
didn't
they could say,
know.
then they could say every 4 months then?
Yeah, that's why it doesn't make sense to me
Yeah.
that you could continue to raise it.
It just
You'd go
sounds like a
above them.
tactic to squeeze people and squeeze them out. And
Yeah, it's the
You know,
traditional logic of the 10-foot wall and the 11-foot ladder.
This councilman knows a state senator, so he's going to bring it
And
to
I
your
would just
attention.
use this as a plug. So one law that does mandate one-year leases is the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. And if Fishkill does in fact have a 0.9% vacancy rate, and that can be established with a study, then this town board would be authorized to declare a housing emergency and provide those protections, which are the rent control that gentleman was talking about, which I
Under-
personally
under-
support, but
What'd
is
you
a
say?
different law.
You said it's 0.9%?
county study.
Yeah. So I think, my response to the tightness of the market is we don't want landlords being able to send tenants out into that market.
Where there's
to-
already no availability.
Where there's no availability when we can keep them stably housed where they are, and that's the purpose of the good cause
Thank
law.
you, sir.
Yeah.
All right, it's a good point. All right, guys, it's getting late. Name, yes or no, and a quick, that'll be good. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Eleanor. I live I'm a tenant.
In the mic, ma'am?
Okay, my name is Eleanor. I live in a tenant over in Mountain View, and I'm a senior citizen, and I've been living there about 6 years. And in 3 years, the rent has gone up $750. Now, I think that's unreasonable, and I would like to know why. You talk about senior housing. I've been on the list for 5 years, and I go and I check whether it's Poughkeepsie, Hyde Park, Wappinger Falls, or Fishkill. There's nothing available. They tell me, well, you're 25th on the list. Then when you move up, 5 years. So I'm just saying, how...
The town has about 40 affordable housing units they're not rentals, they're owned by the person. So say 10 years ago, somebody bought a house for 250 grand and they leave, they got to sell it for the same amount. But we might get one person a year to give one of those things up. So that's why you're on that list and they're not getting to you.
But it's
You asked
just
a question,
ridiculous.
I'm just being honest with you.
So, like I said, how long is this going to keep going on? Whether it's Hudson River or Mountain View, that every year,
This is why we're here tonight, ma'am.
right? But is it going to, reduce this? Like, say, maybe 2% a year? It used to be, it was not. I've been there on and off about 10 years. And of course, it was the people before was the family that owned it. And you would get $50, $60. Now, that's fine. People could do that. But they have actually, now, all the seniors have actually moved out of Mountain View because they can't afford it. And I don't think that's right, that we have to go through that.
We agree with
Because,
you.
she said Hudson View, I was thinking of going over there, but now that I hear what's going on, because everybody says, oh, it's cheaper over there, but evidently it's not.
Thank you very much.
And then to just move, what it costs to move and everything.
Right.
So is there going to be, try and cap it at say 2 or 3% in Fishkill? Why did this take so long when all the other towns around that had a cap on the rent?
No, I don't think there's 930 towns in New York State. This would be the first town to adopt this, correct?
I believe
You talk
Yeah,
about
it would be
villages and
cities and.
Cities and villages.
Cities and
That's it.
villages have been adopting it.
Not
We
one
have a chance to
town.
make history tonight.
Because when I don't know who the supervisor was before in Fishkill, I sent him many emails.
Yes.
And he told me that Fishkill doesn't have a cap. And the other, like Beacon does, Poughkeepsie does, they all had a cap of maybe 5% increase where they couldn't pass more than that on to the tenant.
That's not right.
That's not right.
That's not right. That's not the law.
And now, there's a lot of senior citizens, just quickly. Why can't the complex say, well, senior citizens during the COVID, they were the ones that paid the rent. They had income coming in steady. Why? There used to be a discount with the company before if you were a senior, because they knew you didn't have children. You needed less amenities or whatever. Isn't it possible to try and make the seniors where they are in these complexes right now, somehow give them a little discount on their rent so they could survive?
That certainly would be a good thing to do. I just don't know that there's any enforcement mechanism for that. Unfortunately, the reality of our economic system is that bottom line doesn't care about right or wrong. It cares about plus and minus. That's it.
Right. Well, they care, yeah.
It was previously mentioned, one of the board members mentioned about downstate, the units. There's a significant, we're trying to negotiate a portion for over 55 housing to go into there.
Right.
So the town is working on your behalf for seniors over 55 to try to get a portion. The town's plan is we're trying to get it to where we don't have to build another elementary school, number one. And then the second part is to get some senior housing over 55 and some veteran housing and see what those numbers are. This is all tentative. We have to agree to this stuff, but the town is looking to help seniors.
Well, that'd
That's
be a good
fact.
idea.
We're
That's a
trying
fact.
to keep that in the mind
Yes.
of the state and the developer so that any discussions that take place in the
People
future
are
will happen
already
in
there.
good faith with
Yeah.
the residents' interests in mind.
Right. All
I'll be
right,
glad,
thank
and I'm
you.
glad to be participating in those meetings as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
And anybody interested in that type of stuff, go to the town website and sign on to our emails. We've had about 3 meetings of downstate, and once the meetings are done, I sent out an email explaining what's happening, if anybody's interested in that, watching TV or not. And we are trying to push the over 55 housing. I
Thank you.
recognize that.
Okay, thanks.
But please, guys, we're going to be here at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. We're going at this rate. I don't want to push anybody, but yes, no, and ma'am?
Good evening. I'm Isabel Alves. I did write you a
Yes, ma'am.
letter. I'm from the Dutchess County Association of Realtors. I'm the current president. I deal both with sales as well as rentals. My heart does fall for some of these people who are being unjustly taken advantage of. However, I have to point out a couple of things that I would like to talk to you about. So there is the Housing Stability and Protection Act of 2019 that provides, that states the warrants that tenants can delay the issue of eviction up to 1 year. Now, this comes in is that it takes 1 year sometimes to evict a tenant that doesn't pay rent for whatever the cause may be. It does extend the eviction proceedings. The notice of periods of eviction have been expanded to 14 days, giving tenants additional time before proceeding. The defenses to eviction, landlords must notify tenants of late payment within 5 days, and failure to do so can serve as a defense of the victims, the eviction cause. There's a grace period for payment. Tenants can avoid eviction if they make full payment prior to the court hearing. The notice of the rent increase, landlords must provide 30 to 90 days notice for rent increase of 5% or more if they do not intend to renew the tenancy. It's strong protection against retaliation. Landlords cannot evict tenants in retaliation for complaints related to habitability or repairs, as we have talked about. And there's the self-help eviction and is criminalized. Landlords who attempt to evict tenants without a court order face misdemeanor charges and substantial civil penalties. There's a lot more in this letter than you have already read. Now, I'm here because I represent both tenants, and I represent landlords. I represent people who buy homes, people who sell homes. The thing that I don't like about this good cause eviction is it restrains someone who wants to buy. Now, you're thinking about, now, the good cause eviction might be a good thing. However, modifying it where you have a small landlord from 10 to 1 unit, I could be one landlord. If I own one apartment that I'm helping somebody to do, I have one house, right?
Mr. Galvin, clear that up for me again.
If it's an owner-occupied property, it doesn't count toward, oh, I'm so sorry. If it's an owner-occupied property, it does not count toward, it's exempt from the good cause eviction.
Exemption. However, if I have a house and I have one apartment that I am trying to make my retirement, and I rent that one apartment, I fall within this.
No, you do
No,
not.
you do not.
One person, one
Not
house.
the way that it's drafted is.
But if it's more than one, not the way that it's drafted. If it's changed to the way that you want, then it is.
The way that it's drafted, if you are on an owner-occupied property, it doesn't count toward.
Correct.
The law,
Correct.
you're exempt.
It's
And
10 on.
And if you own, there's one other housing development, that's also exempt. So you can have an owner-occupied property and one other rental property, and you would not be subject to this law.
But if you have more than one, then you are.
If you have more than one, you are, yes.
Correct.
Unless the other one is owner-occupied, in which
Right.
case you can have two exempt.
So I represent, as a realtor, I represent a lot of small investors, people who buy 1, 2, 3 family homes that would be able to, they're buying these homes as a retirement. They're buying these homes to be able to collect rent from those income properties in order to put their kids to school. They're buying these homes so that they, at some point, are able to, and hopefully, some of young people who you are here, that I would be able to, at one point, provide you to be a homeowner like that lady. At 60-something, she became a homeowner.
Ma'am, if you can direct your comments to the board, please.
She was able to become a homeowner at a later age.
Okay.
That's awesome. That's what I like to do, right? However, I also have to look up to those landlords that have smaller, that have less than 10 units, right? If you're changing this law.
I think you're going to be very happy with our discussion on accessory apartments and buildings. You're going to be very excited
That
about that.
would be great.
Yes.
The problem here is not, we're trying to put all of the landlords, because of 1 or 2 complexes, you're going to change the law because 2 complexes are not doing the right thing for their tenants. We have to be careful. Has it been studied that this is actually going to work?
Okay, man, just like
Yeah.
I said, you spoke about.
No problem, no
Yeah.
problem. My question, I have a couple of questions. Who's going to pay the landlord's bills when the tenants stop paying? Who's going to pay, if you have tenants that get into these situations and refuse to pay the landlords, who are going to be able to help the landlords pay their bills? Do we have infrastructure in place for the schools? I know that if you make a lot of, if you try to build a lot of rental units, most of those rental units are probably going to, young family homes. Do we have the infrastructure to be able to accommodate the traffic? Do we have the infrastructure? Isn't it better to start with the infrastructure first and then go into the into building the proper homes? The attorney had mentioned something about the tenant refuses to sign a lease. They can stay with that same lease and not sign a new lease, right? Isn't that tenancy for life?
I don't know, ma'am.
Anyhow, I know that we are pressed for time, and I know that there's other people who would like to speak, so just be careful on passing a law that may not be revoked at a later time or changed at a later time. That might come back and bite you in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alves.
Can I say something real quick?
No, you're gonna have to come to the mic.
Come to the microphone.
Come to the mic real quick. That'll, after this gentleman. Just say what your name is. He'll go first. Sir,
My
just
name
your
is Joseph Rutz,
Thank you, sir.
property owner in Fishkill since 2003. Okay. And a taxpayer. A lot of things I don't want to retouch, but you're talking about almost 3,000 apartments in the town of Fishkill, correct?
Right. Yes.
Almost.
And you're talking about lowering the threshold from 10 units to one owner occupied and one additional unit.
No.
Building,
No?
one building.
So one unit that's owner occupied, if it's a two-family, they rent the other half, they do not have to,
You're exempt.
they're exempt. But if they own an additional unit, then that is
That's
under the law.
exempt too.
That's exempt too?
Yeah.
That's what I said. So you can own two buildings, one you live in and rent, the other one you rent, and you're exempt.
Yeah.
Okay. So this law was written by Governor Hochul for New York City. Hochul, I'm sorry, for New York City.
That's incorrect.
What?
That's incorrect. It was written by lawmakers in the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate. And it
Okay.
was written to apply outside of New York City. New York City has its own laws.
Oh, okay, so I stand corrected. But I would just like to say, from what I see at this meeting tonight, we don't understand this law. Okay?
Guys.
We don't know how to enforce this law. We're contemplating passing a law that the details are not even established. We'll just get it in, we'll just sign it off, and we'll just change it as we go.
Mr. Galba, is that the case?
No, it's,
That's what I heard up here tonight. Just sign it and move
You
on.
have not heard that. That's the town attorney who drafted this. Mr.
no,
Galba, explain it to this
it's-
gentleman.
The law itself is drafted with all of its terms.
Guys, please.
The law itself is drafted with all of its terms. It's statutorily written out in Section 211 and a couple of other adjoining sections of the real property law. What the law does is allows two areas that this board can tailor to the town of Fishkill: luxury apartments and small landlords.
Yes.
What had been discussed as far as changing it down the road was there was a question about whether the increases are annual or can be semi-annual, 6 months and so forth. There's nothing about the annual increases in this law, and so there was a discussion about possibly enacting this law and looking into, just as to that issue, amending it later on. But all of the terms of this law are set forth in the real property law, and it's self-executing. You don't have to worry about how the town's going to execute it. It just applies to landlords automatically.
And the town erred in the favor of the small property owner by doing those two conditions.
By making it one dwelling unit instead of, one housing unit, one dwelling instead of one unit. So it's more lenient toward landlords than
Yes.
it would be.
Small.
I thought, I was under the impression the original law said 10 or under.
The New York State statute said that a small landlord would be 10 units or less. So if you had an apartment
So we've
building-
changed that.
We have.
Together.
Now it's just one.
So you have changed it.
Well, yes, we're allowed to.
Okay, you changed it to one.
Those were the two areas you could tailor
Okay.
to.
So should I suggest that small landlords may have worked years to develop their properties to reap the rewards of their hard work by renting their properties at market rates? Is that a consideration of anyone? How much work and sweat and working 2-3 jobs to bring a property to the market? Does it even matter? Or is it all about rent control? Okay? Whatever the profits are, they're taxed accordingly. But the town of Fishkill is now contemplating the adoption of such a code change, adapting a New York City-style housing law, making the laws more restrictive on privately owned parcels that are being rented and controlling the amount of profit a small business owner, landlord can make. You're getting into people's finances, and it's not right. You should not overstretch your authority on a small business owner in the town of Fishkill. We are not New York City. In Fishkill, we have forever lived in a market-based housing economy, as far as I know, unless you are receiving a government subsidy for your housing. A market-based economy, okay? Market-based. That's part of our democratic values, that's part of free enterprise, that's part of capitalism. Let's not change it. Let's not become a state that has to conform to a government that overreaches its citizens and controls the amount of profit they will now make as they change the game in the middle of the game. Because I'm not a landlord, but if I was, I'd be very, very upset. As a taxpayer, I did not sign up to pay for the management of another type of local housing authority in the town of Fishkill. Because if you ask me, that's exactly what you're creating. A Fishkill Town Housing Authority.
Mr. Gaba, can you elaborate on that?
Let him talk.
Who is going to manage these properties? Who is going to provide the resources to oversee, account for, and defend this new law? Which it isn't even determined exactly what's going into this law, but we still want to pass it anyway. The protocol of other cities that have adopted this law should not influence the town of Fishkill. We need to make our own informed decisions. Again, legal expenses, lack of resources. If this law is enacted, in my opinion, many facets of this implementation will become another story to the unfunded cost of administration that town taxpayers will ultimately have to pay, including the cost of lawsuits and the new unfunded mandates that we'll soon discover. When you interfere in free markets, you personally decide who will win and who will lose. This is a problem with strong-arm governments, especially in New York. In my opinion, the good cause eviction process has not been properly vetted to determine both upside and downside risk to the financial impact it will have on both small landlords and residents, and especially residents that own property and are living on a fixed income. I propose this whole rent control discussion be shelved as it interferes with a free and open market-based economy. And as our assessor pointed out today, he's going to be looking at the value of the rents being collected from these properties. So when the value goes down, the assessment goes down. So who picks up the tab?
The value of these apartments are not going down. Mr. Gaba, how is this going to cost the town money? Can you explain that to him? He's making an allegation. Can you clear that up for me, please?
Sure. This is a self-executing law. When the law is on the books, what it says is that tenants can raise as a defense to evictions the provisions of good cause eviction. I haven't failed to pay my rent. I haven't refused to reasonably renew my lease. Things along those lines. The municipality, the town, has nothing to do with it. We're not going to
No, I'm talking about the assessments, the tax assessments.
You're talking about a housing authority. There's no housing authority involved. There's no cost to the town at all.
We pay taxes based on our assessments, correct?
Those apartment complexes are not going down in assessed value. I think they're all under-assessed.
I agree.
And when you talked about change the game, later today, we're going to set a public hearing to allow accessory dwellings for single-family homes. That's going to significantly improve the property values of the residents of the town of Fishkill. Yep. So somebody can come here and say, you're changing the game to make my neighbor richer than me. So we do what's best for the residents of Fishkill, whether they own a house or they rent an apartment. So that's what we're doing. Yes, sir.
Okay, I spoke my piece.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I
gonna let this
So please,
gentleman go.
guys, please, I keep saying this, and we're going 4 or 5 minutes. I don't
Just-
want to have to put a time limit on
Just
anybody.
real quick, I just want to give a testimony. I'm Kathy.
Close to the mic.
I'm Kathy, I live in Fishkill, and I'm a tenant, but I live in a condo. So my landlord is constantly increasing the rent, and I'm currently not working, so now I really...
I'll get you next, sir. Sir,
I
know
really
you're-
would appreciate if you could implement this, pass this, because it's bad enough we have to deal with the cost of food and gas and everything else. You know, there's no, I'm gonna have to move if the rent goes up even more, and he doesn't even do any additional renovations in the unit, and he's constantly raising the rent. So it's just not big complexes, it's individual units too. That was the point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulder.
Louise Daniele, 30-year legal resident. I had a whole thing written out, but I think everybody's kind of touched upon it. I just want to reiterate a few things that I heard other people say. Arnold was one of them. We are not New York City. This is the town of Fishkill. We are not Europe. This is the town of Fishkill. This is not about rent control. It's about good cause eviction, which actually means citizen protection. I think we should change the name of the law to Tara law, because listening to what you said, if anybody votes no, shame on you. Shame on you, because listening to what this woman has to go through is unbelievable. And she represents a lot of people who don't speak, because a lot of people don't like to come. A lot of people are afraid, because they're afraid that if they come here and say the story that she said, they'll get thrown out by the end of the month. They'll get thrown out by Christmas. This isn't even what I had to say. What I had to say had to do with those two, because you know that they're not going to vote yes for it. Absolutely not. I was going to say something about I'm speaking about Councilmember Rye's son, and how we know he's spoken before about he's living in his house. We're thinking about him too. So he's a resident. His wife that's coming, his grandchild that's coming, they might need a place to live. They need to be able to live in a place that's not going to raise the rent $700 next year, $700 next year. I remember coming to a meeting for, it was another public hearing for Rolling Hills, and the chief from the fire department of Chelsea stood up and said, I don't even know if I can still afford to stay in this town, because I can't afford my rent. I know you know it, Ozzy, because you and I actually live in this town for a long time and know and remember the things. So I hope he's still a chief in our town, but he might not be. And we might not have the volunteers to be able to stay in this town, because they can't afford to live in these apartments, because we need to help the people. Yes, I hear all the people in the real estate in the back of the room. I understand that. The developers bought this, the developers bought that. I don't care about the developers. I care about the Taras, and I care about the other people who want to stay in our town, the senior citizens who can't afford it. So when you vote no, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you, and every single person should remember that you're voting no. This is not about a progressive policy. I'm an independent. I don't really care what anybody is on this board, but you all have to remember you work for us, and you work for her. And the senior citizen, and the guy who left because he was pissed because he couldn't talk to, because the other guy was talking for so long. But it's really, it's just insane. And I didn't really understand it, but just so, Mr. Gaba, it's an opt-in. So the law was written, and we're opting into it for the state. Who would actually be in charge of enforcing it if something was violated?
There is no enforcement. The law allows tenants to raise objections to increases in rent. If a landlord comes to you with a lease that says, I'm raising your rent 15%, you as a tenant have a right to say, well, now wait a minute. And there has to be notices about the good cause eviction law in both the lease and the notice, saying you have rights under this. And
who has to write that? The landlord?
The landlord, yes.
So what if the landlord doesn't? Everything that we're doing here tonight could be moot because the landlord won't put it into the what they have to sign?
What would happen is when there's an eviction proceeding, because that's how you have to be evicted, there's no self-help anymore. You would go into court, and it would be up to the landlord to prove that he had given those notices and that the language regarding good cause eviction was written into the lease. If he could not prove that, the judge will not grant him the warrant for eviction.
And when you say judge, so local court is what we're talking about?
Yeah, justice court.
Local landlord court, yeah. And for everybody else who had to listen to the dissertation by Councilmember Rye, This is not the county, Dutchess County, town of Fishkill. Focus on the town, not on the county, not on Europe, not on New York City. It's about the people in this room and the people at home who want you to do the right thing. But we'll see if you will.
I keep saying it, I'm sorry. Name and...
Ozzy, I will be very brief.
Thank you.
So my name is Kevin Carswell. I've lived in Fishkill for almost 34 years. I've been in Dutchess County for 45 years. I am neither a renter nor a landlord. I care deeply about this community. Some of the opposition to this law, which I support, is bringing up a lot of topics which don't really relate to this law. I have read the law. It is very simple.
Yep.
Protecting the rights of renters against landlords that are not good landlords. It was said before that this doesn't affect good landlords that are treating their tenants well. You can still evict for good cause. You can't evict if you don't have a good cause. Protecting renters. And the renters are our fellow citizens in Fishkill. The landlords, some of them are in Fishkill, many of them are not. They are driven by profit. Renters are driven by trying to get by every day. So to me, this is very simple, and I would urge the board to pass this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cantor?
Fred Cantor, Town of Fishkill resident, realtor, been selling real estate here in Fishkill for over 50 years. I represent tenants, I represent landlords. I hate landlords who gouge, which seems to be happening in one of the units. Rents, whatever they're going to be. One of the things I do have a problem with this, as you have presented, is bringing it down to one unit, all right? We have people who own, we have a lot of small units, have 2 or 3 family homes, and they're going to be brought into this. I can tell you as a landlord, which I hate being, all right? I got rid of my units, but there are bad tenants, all right? Not that they'll pay their rent at the last minute where you go after them and, you know, it's hard. You really don't want to renew them after a while. And if they want to stay, it's very hard to get them out. And I have to hire an attorney to get them out. It costs me money to do that. Now, I understand the big units, they can afford it. But you're bringing this down to a real small unit, all right? And that's a lot of our little people. And I know after you get your mother's home, all right, you're going to want to maybe invest and go out and buy another home to be a landlord. It might be a 2-family or a 3-family, all right, which we do have a group of them here in Fishkill, all right? And we're putting a little damper on them. And I'm going to have to tell you as a realtor, when I sell one of these units now, I'm going to have to tell those small units, all right, of the things that they have to do. I'd love to, I don't understand why you dropped it down to 1, all right? As far as I know, there are no other municipalities that have it that low at this point in time.
Okay, let him speak, guys, let him speak. Oh, Mr. Cantor.
All right. That have the 1 unit. 10 is reasonable, all right? And I wish you would amend that to bring it back up to at least that, all right? I'm really not in favor of the good cause eviction at all. I believe the marketplace should take care of it. I believe there are things we can do in Fishkill.
Mr.
to
Cantor,
do
what
that.
was the number you said, bring it back up to what number?
10.
Bring it back to 10.
Yeah, bring it up to 10. I mean, it just, you're putting a lot of burden on a lot of other people, real small investors, all right? And there are a lot of us. And right, I'll tell you, everybody in this room would love to be able to own a house and, well, most of us would like to own a house, all right, and be able to rent it out and have the tenants pay our mortgage, all right? And this is my future, this is my investment, this is what I'm living on right now, all right? But again, Bring it up. Bring it up to where it takes away from the small investor, all right? Big guys can afford the attorneys, all right? They got attorneys on call all the time. Little guys don't, and it costs me the same amount of money for my attorney to go in and represent somebody, all right? Thank you.
Cantor.
Before we have the next speaker, the gentleman had been wanting to speak earlier but missed his chance. I'd like to invite him.
Hi, my name is Robert Brown. I've lived in this area for 40 years. I think you people are getting off the track of what's going on here. It's not about Europe. It's not about what New York City does. It's about right here. I've lived here for 40 years. In 37 years, my rent's gone up $750. 37 years. The last 3 years, $800. How can we justify that? The owners of Mountain View, they not only own this complex, they own 3 other complexes, 2 in Nyack and 1 in New Jersey. Should that make a difference too? Do we want to group that with New York City? This is not about the person with a small unit that's renting a 5-unit apartment complex and funding their house in Florida that they could stay for 6 months. This is about the people that have been here for 40 years, the people that grew up here, want to retire here, for the families that want to move here and be able to raise their children and not pay outrageous rents. And you want to postpone this for another 6 months. How many people will lose their homes in that 6 months while we're doing another study? I just hope that, you know, when you do this vote on this, that you vote your conscience and you take care of the people that have been here and supported you guys all along. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for waiting, sir. Mr. Cardinelli?
Good evening, Anthony Cardinelli, resident. There's been a lot of, like, I guess, back and forth over what a unit is versus a dwelling. So I just want to ask the question to clarify. So if someone has a duplex, right, there's 2 units there, but that's considered one dwelling.
Housing accommodation.
One housing accommodation. So if someone has a building and there are 1 building, but there's 10 units within that 1 building, is that landlord still exempt because it's one building?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'm just asking as a point of clarification.
Yeah.
So it's, again, to clarify, it sounds like if someone is purposefully damaging property, they can still be evicted.
Right.
If someone is refusing to pay rent, the landlord can still evict them. Landlords can still raise rent from year to year. And if landlords are doing extensive upgrades and they can prove the cost of those upgrades, they're allowed to then raise the rent accordingly. So it sounds like this is stronger due process protections for renters. Do I have that correct? I'm just taking all this in from one night, so.
Let Mr. Gallagher answer. He hit the points right on the money.
Pretty much, yeah, as far as that goes. I wouldn't couch it in terms of due process. I mean, the process is what the process is in terms of evicting someone. We've already talked about some of the other statutes that are on the books. What this law does is limits the amount of rent that can be charged year to year, annually, or I'm looking into whether it's by lease, but I'm pretty sure it's annually. And it provides that there can be no arbitrary refusal to re-rent, renew a lease. So you can't have a landlord who says, I'm going to move you out, I'm just not going to renew because, well, I want someone else other than you, unless there's a good reason to do that. Those are the 2 pillars of this law as far as that goes. The process of eviction is codified, you know, both in the landlord-tenant law and in these other laws that we've mentioned this evening. So it's not so much due process, it is those substantive terms.
Okay, thank you.
Anthony, thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Kim Sendelbach. You probably remember my son Adam from this summer, the tall guy.
The Eagle Scout.
Hi, Adam. He's watching us live right now. He's asked me to come and speak and say a few things. One thing he wanted me to point out is I'm a registered Republican. I still have ideas about the good cause eviction, pro and con. I have 5 kids, ranging in age from 27 to 15. I have my 27-year-old son, he lives in Boston, the rent's there, can't even talk about the rents there. But my 25-year-old daughter and her son, we would love for them to be able to live in this community.
Here.
Just can't afford it, so she's living in Albany because the rents in Albany are cheaper. Wow. I have a 23-year-old son still living at home because he cannot afford anything right now. Adam's at school, and then my 15-year-old daughter is in Beacon. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about is, 1, affordable housing. That is my main primary concern for my children. My children need a place to live. I would love for them to live nearby in Fishkill. Second, good cause eviction. I tend to agree with the gentleman who was talking about, the people who are talking about landlords who have less than 10 units. I think we should have that at 10, not at 1.
Mr. Gabbard, we have that at 10 then.
It can be as many units as you want in the additional housing accommodation.
But we're talking about 1 unit for this meeting, right? We're talking about 1 for the town of Fishkill, or are we talking about 10 for the town of Fishkill?
We're talking about neither.
What?
Neither. Housing accommodation, not unit.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is a
There's
little
a difference.
confusing. Yes, I understand
So
there's a difference.
A unit
Okay.
is a single
Okay,
sellable
for
or
people-
rentable
so people-
dwelling.
So investors like perhaps myself, if I had 2 units that I was renting, this law would then apply to me.
Unless one of them was owner occupied, yes.
Okay, so if I owned my own house and I had 2 other units, then that law would apply to me.
If you lived in one of the rental units, if it was a duplex, for example, then that would be exempt up to 10
Okay,
units.
so I have okay, so the town of Fishkill is looking exempt up to 10 units.
For owner occupied.
So if you have 10 apartments in a building and you live in one of them, you'll be exempt up to 10.
Okay, so if I have a single-family home, and I live in my single-family home, and then I have 2 other smaller homes that I'm renting out, 2 other single-family smaller homes that I'm renting
It would
out,
apply to one of the 2.
One of them.
it would only apply to 1 of them.
Yeah, because you get one that's, well, the first one you're not renting out, you're just living in, it's irrelevant.
Okay.
The other one is the first housing accommodation, and the first housing accommodation is exempt. And then the second housing accommodation, which is the second building, is subject to the law.
Okay, so I could have up to, the town of Fishkill is saying I can have 1 exempt,
Yes,
and that's it, just 1.
unless you live in the other one.
Okay,
and then
unless
you
I
can
live
be
in the
there
other
as
one.
long as there's not more.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's just confusing for
It
me.
is a little confusing.
We understand.
So, thank you for clarifying that. That's all I have to say, affordable housing for my kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Halloran.
Thank you.
Ma'am?
Hi, my legal name is Julianne, but I go by Maki, they, them pronouns. That being said, I look a lot different than you guys up there. But I come from a father who is a senior, older, privileged white man, and a mom who is a real estate agent. My parents love me, and I'm sure that those up there love their kids as well. Your kids are never going to be able to afford a home unless you too come from the privilege that I do, where you're able to pay the extraordinary rent that my parents do to keep me housed. And, you know, I will make this brief because I have a 6 a.m. shift at Hannaford tomorrow, so I'm up way later than my bedtime. I go to sleep pretty early. I'm not usually able to have a voice. This is my first town hall meeting. I've been pretty jaded and have lost faith in a lot of government as, you know, someone who, I look really young, good genetics, I'm 30. But, you know, for people like me who are afraid to get up in front of a bunch of older white gentleman who
Hey, I'm only 32.
I'm not pandering to you. I think we're on the same page. But I feel like it's my duty to speak out, and I work with some really amazing people. One of my coworkers, she's a fantastic person, just a little bit younger than me, and she was unhoused for a very long period of time. She was stuck living in Fishkill Inn for a very long time. All her paychecks went to helping her family pay just to keep having a roof over their heads every night, and we don't make a lot of money. And, you know, I think that young people like me, we have so little say because we don't believe our government hears us. And we need protections. And just because we don't own properties, it doesn't mean we don't work hard and we don't sweat. We work hard, our sweat and blood and tears. We help to provide services to the economy. Where would we be without me working to fulfill your orders at Hannaford, right? And I do believe that housing is a human right, and we're all humans here, and some of you have kids my age, and I really, really hope that your kids will have a roof over their head even long after you're gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Maki.
We've passed 2 hours on this public hearing, so this will be the last two speakers.
Good evening. My name is Tony Meck. I've lived in the area for 10 years, and I've been proud to call Fishkill my home for the last 4 years. And I'm here tonight to urge the town board to pass the strongest possible version of good cause eviction. I'm fortunate to own my home in Fishkill, but what we're hearing tonight and what we've been hearing for months is that Fishkill tenants, Fishkill renters do not have 6 months to wait. There were 36 evictions filed in Fishkill this year already, and 50 were filed last year. That means that in the 6 months of committee deliberation, that's potentially 25 or more families who would be forcibly pushed out of their homes. Anyone who has seen or witnessed or can even imagine an eviction knows that this is a trauma that lasts for generations. So the well-being of the folks in this room, the well-being of their children and beyond is in your hands. And if you delay this legislation, those 25 or more families who will be forced out of the area, those same families who are your constituents, who voted you into office, their livelihoods will be diminished greatly because of your delay on this legislation. This law is also an expression of the reasons why you came into public service. When you decided to run for office, did you decide to do so that you could form a committee to study all of the things that you could not do? Or did you come here to sit before us and look at the tools that were available to you, as imperfect as they may be, and think about how can we use these tools to protect as many of our constituents as possible? I hope that you choose to truly serve the public, to keep your constituents who voted you into office in their homes, and not to defer to the largely corporate landlords who are siphoning money away from Fishkill. The town board has an opportunity tonight to join our neighbors in Newburgh, Beacon, Poughkeepsie, and beyond in saying we want our laws to protect the many and not the few. I know that you all have it in you to do the right thing and vote to pass this tonight and not delay another 6 months. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. You guys still awake?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mike Shade. I live in Fishkill. My wife and I are newer residents to the town. We moved here about three and a half years ago. We are homeowners and taxpayers. I've spoken about this issue a couple of months ago, and I wanted to be here tonight to express my support for good cause eviction once again. I'll try to limit my comments to some items that have not been discussed yet by other speakers. A couple of things that I think are important to note. We just had an election, and I think one of the things that was really clear with the election is people here in New York, including here in Fishkill, care about the economy. They care about affordable housing. There was a Marist poll that was done here in New York State this past year, which found that 7 in 10 New York State adults report that affordability of housing is a major problem in their local communities, including here in the Hudson Valley and elsewhere in upstate New York. Here in Fishkill, we have an opportunity to protect tenants. As a homeowner, I personally think it's important for everyone in this community to have access to good quality, affordable housing. And unfortunately, when tenants are priced out or evicted, this can make our community less stable. If people are evicted without protections, they could experience homelessness, which can present serious challenges for our town, the local police force, as well as other local governmental agencies and service organizations. And as taxpayers, this could be costly to us as a community, and greatly concerns me as someone that pays taxes like many of us. It's worth noting that according to the most recent census here at the federal level, we have data on Fishkill, and we know that 47% of Fishkill renters today are rent burdened, meaning that they pay more than 30% of their income to rent. 47% of Fishkill renters. That's what we're here tonight. We can't wait 6 months to delay protections for these folks. I also want to note that, as we've heard from other folks, landlords who treat their tenants fairly have nothing to fear from good cause. This is fair for landlords, and this is fair for tenants. This is a win-win. The bill does not protect tenants who don't pay. The bill does not protect tenants who violate their lease terms, damage property, or create a nuisance. Small landlords who live in the same building as their tenants are exempt. So this is a common sense protection that can protect not only tenants, but also ensure protections for landlords as well. We heard about other communities that have passed similar legislation recently. We're not talking about New York City. We're talking about Beacon. We're talking about Poughkeepsie. We're talking about Kingston. We're talking about Newburgh. Council member, I know you spoke about concerns with whether or not if this law was passed, whether or not that would stifle development in the community. I can tell you I work in Newburgh. Every other day I go to Newburgh, I see a new building popping up, being developed. You go to Beacon, you see new housing popping up. You go to Poughkeepsie, you see new housing popping up. These local laws are not stifling development here in the Hudson Valley. A couple of other things that I wanted to speak to. Also, according to the census, there are roughly 1,900 households in Fishkill that live in buildings with between 2 and 9 units. So that's why it's really critically important to set the portfolio exemption at 1. To ensure that these families know that they're covered, providing that their landlord doesn't live in the same building. Setting the exemption higher would make it nearly impossible for them to know whether or not they're covered, because tenants have no way of knowing how many other unit a landlord owns. So as we're talking about this question of 10 versus 1 units, that's 1,900 households that would not be protected if you weaken the law that has been proposed. A couple of other things that I wanted to speak to, and then I'll close. I know it's getting late. We've heard many folks talk about this question, whether or not we should delay this by 6 months. We've been talking about this at town board meetings for at least 3 or 4 months now. This is the first time that I've personally heard that we should consider delaying this by 6 months. What will happen if we delay this by 6 months? We're going to waste taxpayer dollars, we're going to waste time, and in the meantime, landlords can only increase the rent for those folks whose leases expire during that period. The final thing that I wanted to note is there was a question of, how has this affected other towns? How has this affected other cities? The state of New Jersey has had good cause eviction since 1974. 1974. How many years is that?
50.
50 years. Last time I checked, I've been in New Jersey quite a bit. I got a lot of family there. Pretty much every time you go to New Jersey, you see a lot of homes being built. You see a lot of apartment complexes being built. If New Jersey can do it for 50 years, I think the town of Fishkill can as well. Thank you.
All right. That's it.
Oh, one last thing. I just wanted to, since I'm the last speaker, we have a petition that's been signed by roughly 200 residents of Fishkill. We've heard about other residents that have been in opposition. Here's a petition signed by nearly 200 residents in support of the strongest version of this law. Thank you.
Well done, sir. Any board member has anything to say before we close it?
Yes.
Go on.
I see nothing wrong with bringing a proposal to the town board. It's part of why we sit here. I see nothing wrong in, I'm sorry, with some people, the timing may be a little askewed, but if a question enters your mind and you develop some ideas, you should bring them. You should discuss them. That's a part of why I am here and why I was elected and re-elected, and I'm very proud to be here. Because I brought that concept here, it did not in any way indicate a way in which I'm voting for this thing. I brought a concept to be discussed, and I got personally assaulted by a number of people, and I say shame on you. So let's proceed.
All right, well, I will just conclude my portion by thanking everyone who came out tonight. It isn't always easy to come and discuss issues that matter, particularly on an issue important as this. As it was pointed out, for many of you coming here, should this measure fail, retribution is not out of the question. So you have demonstrated profound courage in being here, and I thank you for doing so. I've said at this podium before that we use our voices to discuss, debate, and occasionally yell, but the only voice that matters in the end is the voice that we use when we vote. That is our measure as legislators. That is our measure as representatives of you. Tonight I am voting for you, and I encourage all of my fellow council members to do the same.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to move resolution
Well,
number...
we need to close the public hearing.
I apologize. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to move resolution number 1 to right now. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Foreman, all in favor?
Aye.
Town of Fishkill, resolution to adopt the good cause eviction law, ID number 9666.
Excuse me, Supervisor, wait, I need to find it. Got it, thank you.
Whereas the town board has before it for consideration a local law entitled, a local law amending the town code of the town of Fishkill by enacting a new chapter 116 entitled Rental Properties, Prohibition of Eviction Without Good Cause, and whereas following the due notice of the town board held a public hearing on the proposed local law, now therefore it be resolved as follows. Number one, that the proposed local law constitutes a type 2 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and 2, that the town board hereby adopts the said local law, and 3, that the said local law shall be effective upon filing in the office of the Secretary of State in Albany. Request a roll call vote.
You need to introduce it as a motion.
Present that as a motion.
I second.
Roll call.
Councilmember Totino?
Proudly votes yes.
Councilmember Foreman?
Yes.
Councilmember Rye?
Yes.
Supervisor Albrecht?
Yes, motion passes. We had about 50 people in here about 10 minutes ago. Now we got 4. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Foreman. All right, privilege of the floor for general town items. Please be quick.
I will be quick. Kenya. Louise Daniele, resident of 30 years. I would like to ask that future agendas include discussions with board members before it comes to resolution time. It was not right that we had to wait until the end of the last meeting to hear Mr. Foreman's pages of reasons why he wanted to vote no to the amended 2025 budget, which made no sense whatsoever, since just prior to that he voted yes to add the amendments to the 2025 budget. So he voted no for something that he already voted yes for. Then he wrote a letter to the editor for the Southern Dutchess News trying to explain his vote when he apparently didn't even understand it. It was also very unprofessional to call out 2 specific employees who received raises when he himself has almost double the amount of money he makes since he first crossed the line into our town from East Fishkill and onto our board. Very hypocritical, coming from someone who gave over $400,000 in raises last year when it wasn't even budget time. Also, it would have been nice to hear a discussion prior to the resolution time regarding medical buyouts. Again, for someone, Councilmember Foreman, who now is able to use our taxpayer dollars to receive medical benefits for himself, he didn't want to raise the buyout price because of his obvious dislike for the supervisor. He actually said, quote, "I don't know how many people are benefiting from it, but I know it's going to be the supervisor and the town clerk that benefit from it," end quote. He said, I would say he should do his homework in the future before he speaks. If he did, he would have realized, as Mr. Gaba later explained, that it saves the town money to have buyouts instead of paying for employees' medical benefits, such as those that he receives. Again, hypocritical. The audience did not have a chance to get up and speak to his ill-informed thought process because there was no public comment session at the end of when his discussion was, which was at resolution time. Mr. Foreman put his personal feelings of not wanting the supervisor and the town clerk to receive the $6,000 buyouts over the benefit it would have been to the town employees who already believed they would have received that amount. I can understand him being upset with anything that the supervisor does, since the supervisor beat him when he ran last year by 1,266 votes. But to put our town clerk, Becky, on the spot, who actually campaigned for him when he previously was in the Republican Party, is disgraceful and shows that he has no allegiance to anyone but himself. I believe our clerk is owed an apology by him for his unbecoming behavior. To end on a positive note, the Verplank Garden Club will have their children's holiday craft event. There was an e-gov that went out, but the dates were mixed up. So I just want to make sure people know it's this Saturday in the basement of Town Hall from 9:30 to 12:30. 3-year-olds to 11-year-olds, they get to make a Christmas craft, and it's
Well,
really,
what do you mean dates mixed up?
on the e-gov it said,
The flyer?
on the flyer it said it's this Saturday, but on the bottom part it said it was last Saturday.
We're doing another e-gov follow-up
Okay.
on that.
All right, that's cool.
All right.
I also noticed walking in Town Hall how nice it looked with all of the holiday decorations, so thank you to the Verplank Garden Club committee who put up all the holiday decorations in the hallway, including walking in here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Cardinelli?
Good evening again,
Did you get the e-gov with the trail information?
I have not. Where am I able to find updated trail
So we
information?
just sent you an email a couple days ago. Maybe you haven't looked at it yet.
I will look through my inbox again.
You don't have it, let me
I
know,
haven't
I'll send it to
received any updates, but I'll.
We sent out,
You're signed up for our town e-gov newsletters, right?
I get emails from the town. I don't know if that's different from eGov, but I get a lot.
eGov is the informal name for the platform that we use. It's a newsletter system
Okay.
that goes out.
you got a question about the rail trail, and in that report, it talks about fencing and stuff.
All right, so I will look through my inbox again.
And if you don't
see.
have it, send me an email, I'll send it to you.
Okay. So a few questions or comments about downstate. It seems like when we first heard about the proposed development, it seemed like the board's response was pretty steadfast against what was proposed. And I feel like that in communication since then, it's almost like you're trying to, I don't want to say back off, but maybe not as stern or confident as you once were about how we're standing up for this.
So-
I would like to get through, and then I would be more than happy to.
Yeah.
We have a legal,
Well, just
with our verbiage, we were cautioned
I
with
thought he
that.
wanted to go through and then.
I'm not really asking a legal question at this
Well,
point. I'm just saying the tone
Well,
has seemed like it has changed since the beginning to now.
Well, it may seem that way.
Mr. Gaba, just get to the mic, because people listening to this
I beg your
downstate,
pardon.
everybody's interested in this, so.
Very good. So there've been a couple of meetings, and at the very first meeting, the supervisor made it clear that the town does not want the downstate development, as proposed at least, in the town of Fishkill. And the people, Conifer, who are developing it, said, well, if you don't want this, perhaps there are other things that we can do. And since then, there's been a number of, I won't say demands, but statements that it is a non-starter unless you can, at a minimum, give the town, and then the supervisors continually say, what's in it for the town, what's in it for the town? One of the things was mentioned tonight, for example, senior housing. If they aren't going to come in with a substantial component of senior housing, the town's just not going to play ball with them. That will fight them all the way as far as that goes. Affordable housing was another thing that was discussed. That's a little more of a gray area. It could be workforce housing. It could be, different degrees of affordable housing. But there has not been any concession by the town that they will accept the downstate redevelopment in any way, shape, or form. There's just been a number of things. If you want to come and propose this, you got to have at least. And we're still listening. I don't know if when the next meeting is. I don't know if we have one scheduled at this
Well,
point.
we hired 2 attorneys.
Hired outside counsel to deal with those issues, and I suppose they're going to come back with some proposal. But it's not the case at all, and I'm sorry if that's the way that the rhetoric has sounded, that the town is negotiating for something with the state and Conifer. They're listening to what it is these people may come up with after the town told them what they were proposing was completely unacceptable.
Okay. Although my first comment wasn't intended to be legal in nature, my next question is, so recently there was the Rolling Hills decision where, please correct me if I'm wrong, my takeaway from that is that when it comes to zoning laws in the town of Fishkill, the town of Fishkill gets to decide which, if a zoning is going to be changed for a specific property.
I wasn't counsel on Rolling Hills, so I really can't speak to that.
Well, explain how the state is exempt from this statute.
Oh, okay.
That's what he wants to know.
Well, New York State, and it's like most other municipalities, is not subject to zoning laws. They can come in and say, we want to develop a piece of property in another municipality in the state. It would be anywhere within the state. And for other municipalities, there's a legal test. It's called the Monroe County Balancing Test that has to be gone through. Usually it's by the host community, but it can be by the community that's doing the development. Sometimes it's done by both. And if it's determined that the developer municipality is going to have a significant public interest in the development, then they trump the local zoning laws. The state gets an additional bonus. They don't have to go through the County Monroe Balancing Test. The state can come in and say, as a state development, not as selling it to someone else, mind you, as a state project, we are coming in and developing this as whatever it may be, some infrastructure improvement, that's a state airport, whatever it might be, and your local zoning doesn't mean anything. They still have to go through secret review, so there is some input locally from it. But can the local municipality say, no, our zoning or our comprehensive plan doesn't allow that? They cannot.
So because, just to reiterate, so because, even though I believe it is currently zoned for 80 units.
1 house per acre.
1 house per acre, because the state officially owns that land, the state does not have to abide by that at all.
Well, it's the at all that I would take issue with. If the state wants to sell it to some third party, as they're proposing to do here, then yes, they do have to abide by town zoning, and that's why one of the things that they're asking for is the town to very possibly amend its comprehensive plan, but at least amend its zoning. They're talking about a planned development district, a PDD, to allow both commercial and residential development. However, if the state decides that they're going to be the owner and maybe have a 99 or however many year land lease for it, they could trump the town zoning. It would be very different than if they're going to sell it.
One of the things that keeps on coming up is affordable housing, and I have a feeling that my definition of that might be different from what has been coming up tonight as far as rentals go. In my opinion, one of the reasons why housing has become so unaffordable in the town of Fishkill is that whatever projects have been built, we're not talking about what I would consider a regular size or a normal sized home, right? Homes maybe that people would only consider starter homes, right? 1,200, 1,500 square feet. Those homes, I don't even know the last time a home of that size, which would be relatively affordable, have been built.
And that's part of dealing with our specialized attorneys, dealing with the state. It's really not the number of homes, it's the type of homes. If we can get a nice portion of over 55 for the seniors, but something that wasn't mentioned was we have a lot of seniors that live in their big 4,000 square foot homes. They want to sell, but they'll pay more in renting than paying taxes and having somebody cut the grass. So you have a beautiful home that's sitting empty that a nice family can move into because the lady or the man can't afford to rent an apartment.
It sounds like some of the rents are higher than my mortgage used to be.
Yes, no doubt about it. And
by orders of magnitude in some cases.
But that's just one portion of the downstate property. It was mentioned before, there's no fire district. We're very concerned with the schools. Anything that creates the need to build a new school, we ain't doing it. This is not gonna happen. So these are and then there's sidewalks. The governor's proposal is walking distance to the train station. There's no sidewalks. We're trying to get some veteran housing because it goes by Castle Point. So these are the things that we're talking, and it seems, Mr. Gatto, you think there needs to be some progress?
Well, you've told them a number of things that they absolutely can't have.
Yep.
For example, 1,300, or was it 1,500? I forget the number.
1,350.
I thought it was 13.
Units is just unacceptable, and so they have to decide on less units. When they do decide on less units, which they have not done yet, they have to have a requisite for even talking to them about it would be a certain number of senior housing and a certain number of workforce, affordable, whatever it would be.
So for example, the Beacon City School District is down, what, about 600 people?
Yeah, 600
kids?
students, what they said.
So if there's a number of apartments that can bring 600 kids to the school district can absorb it, and there's no need to build a new school, they're going to do the studies and calculations with the Beacon City School District to come up with that number first. Is that correct, Mr. Gallo?
That is, but if they wanted to come up with housing that would result in more, or even may result in more than 600, don't even bring the request to the town, Ozzy said that's just not going to be acceptable. So that's the type of thing. And the same thing with we're getting too detailed now,
Yeah.
but the height of the buildings would require a ladder truck that they proposed, and Ozzy said that's not going to work. We're not going to buy a ladder truck. You don't want to buy a ladder truck. You got to come up with a reconfiguration of these homes. And so they're talking about things like maybe 2.5 stories, maybe a basement apart, who knows? But the point is, he said, you can't have it this tall. And so they have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that's less in building height than what's there now.
And I'd say there needs to be a grocery store servicing that population down there.
They've discussed that as well. But again, this isn't a negotiation per se. This is, if you want to come, don't come unless you have this, that, and the third thing.
So there hasn't been it's like the town attorney said, these are things that are not acceptable.
Very preliminary.
And not to negotiate in public, I'm not looking for a number here, but do you gentlemen have a number in mind, a number of units in mind that going above that would be unacceptable? Because 1,300 is absolutely acceptable. I would think 800 is too.
Like Councilman, it's the type. The first thing first is not the need to build a new school. We understand the developer wants to make money, and it's probably going to be more like square footage, I would say. If you're talking 101 bedrooms or 102 bedrooms, which is worse? You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's more to it than that. I mean, for example, the number of traffic trips generated.
How many cars?
By units. You can't just say 750's the line. It's going to depend on what it is they're proposing.
Yeah.
The number's going to largely be dependent on the percentage breakdown of what type of housing and what units we're looking at. Then we'll be able to actually have more detailed discussions when and if they come back with a revised plan.
The more over 55 housing is better because they drive less. Simple as that.
So speaking of seniors and veterans, has anyone actually reached out to seniors or seniors groups or at Castle Point to ask what kind of housing our veterans or our seniors are in need of and looking for, instead of us making guesses?
I went to an event for Veterans Day a couple weeks ago at Castle Point, and we spoke about all the good stuff as this town's been doing for veterans. Last week we had a ceremony for Sidney Schofield, who was killed in the Spanish-American War. We dedicated a plaque I went through the whole thing, and I spoke to a couple of people there asking, that were trying to get, they mentioned downstate, and I talked about getting them housing. They just care about some housing so they can get to Castle Point. That's what they're concerned about. So if you had 100 housing veteran units for one person each, you're talking 12, like you said, 1,000 square feet max. And we know they don't have kids, you know, I don't know if they're gonna have kids or not, but they have access, if we had a sidewalk, they could actually walk to Castle Point.
Right now, does it look like any of the proposals are these all supposed to be apartments, or are there actual single-family homes in the proposal?
At the last meeting, they did mention they might want to put some townhomes in there. That was a possibility, yes.
But no single-family resident individual homes. I consider townhomes different from that. I understand that they're not rentals.
Yeah, so the non-rentals that they mentioned may be townhomes.
Okay.
Cluster of townhomes.
All right, then I know this is a late night, so I'll just...
No, you stayed here till 10 o'clock, you can speak.
Well, I've been to really late school board meetings, and I really don't intend to keep you guys that late. But the last thing that I want to say tonight actually has to do with the rec center. Some of you may not know. I probably spent almost half of my adult life working for the town of Fishkill. I used to work for the rec center for 15 years. I was very frustrated when I found out that the rec center was being dedicated to Joan Pagonis.
Okay.
During my time as an employee, she treated me with nothing but respect in the instances that I've ever had to interact with her. And I think for much of her time here, she probably did a lot of good things for the town. With that being said, as it came closer to the election in which she lost, a lot of things came to light about finances and how finances were handled in the town of Fishkill. The credit rating of our town was tanked because of decisions that were made on her watch. I'm not talking about accidents, I'm talking about deliberate decisions. And many residents at the time were asking for forensic audits to find out exactly what was done and why it was done and what was covered up. And to the best of my knowledge, that never happened.
Correct.
Even afterwards, people were also asking for legal action because what happened to the finances of our town. So to dedicate a building to someone who left in that way, I think is very short-sighted.
Okay.
And I think it sets a bad precedent, because what people can take away from that is that you can do things to the town of Fishkill to put us in a place that we shouldn't be in. And eventually, if enough people forget about it, you will be rewarded. And that is not the message that we should be sending. You know, up here, there is often healthy debate going back and forth. Sometimes some of that debate is not healthy, but I like to think that everyone is trying to do what they feel is in the best interest of the town. And I hope that in doing so, everyone is listening to anyone that comes up to the microphone. But I think we need to think long and hard about who we are dedicating certain things to in the town of Fishkill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. LaGoy?
I'm wondering where we are with the resolution for the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. I know, Mr. Rye, you were working on that.
Yes, we seem to have run into a stalemate on implementing that.
Oh. Can you specify?
I think the town board wants to address those issues as ourselves.
Yeah.
That's quite a change of heart, Supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we'll be paying attention for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Everybody already spoke, right? Okay. That's almost 3 hours of public speaking tonight. That's pretty good for open government. Next up is liaison reports. You got anything, Greg?
It's late. I'll
Okay.
talk about anything next time.
John?
I will pass.
Brian?
Pass.
Supervisor comments, I'll pass. No presentation, discussions. Discussion to appoint the energy supplier for the electricity based on a recommendation of energy consultant.
Yes.
Good, all right. Discussion on accessory apartments and buildings. Are we going to set a public hearing for that today?
I think I gave you a resolution on that.
Yeah,
didn't
let
I?
me see what we got here.
Or was that just on for discussion?
No, there's
There's a
Yeah,
resolution on it?
discussion.
Yeah, there's a resolution to appoint energy suppliers.
No, this is to set a public hearing on the accessory apartments.
I
All right.
read that, by the way, if I could just make a comment.
Yeah, this one.
I thought it was appropriate, but the only thing, because it can't exceed 1,000 feet, which is
No
appropriate.
resolution for public hearing.
I'm sorry?
No resolution for public
resolution.
hearing tonight. It was just on for discussion.
So what I read then, wherever I read it, I thought it was perfectly fine, but, and I know that we, inside of that, you had, they must, zoning and land space and everything else, and sanitation, and they are to be inspected, whether it's a garage you're doing, or even one of those buildings that you can buy and put there, but I didn't see that specifically mentioned.
No, I looked into the tiny homes issue, Brian, and I felt that between having the, 350 square foot? Yeah, 350 square foot minimum and the 1,000 square foot
1,000
maximum,
yeah.
you would really pretty much avoid that type of thing.
Okay.
If it's a problem, we can, of course, modify it.
Look at
but,
it at the time, okay.
Well, I had the same idea. They make tiny homes between 350 and 1,000 square feet, right?
They probably do.
I would assume so, but,
So that's why I'm okay with it. Doesn't really matter.
okay.
Oh,
If
I'm
you
good with
don't want tiny homes, we could put in
No,
a
I'm
provision.
okay with tiny homes, as
I
long
think
as,
it's fine, as long as they have the acreage or the
Yes.
space or the whatever.
if there's 20-foot setback and they're
Yeah.
20 feet back, if they got a septic, they got the septic requirement.
Right,
I'm okay with all that stuff.
me too.
Well, this law gets you there.
So let's get a resolution for the next meeting
Sure.
to schedule the public hearing.
All right.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Next, three,
Table that till the next meeting, Cooper?
Cooper, table that to, what is it, December 4th?
Is that the next one?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, next up is resolution to appoint 2 part-time police officers. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Then reinstate another police officer. Everybody okay with that?
Yes, I had a conversation with our officer in charge about why he's being reinstated. I was a little confused, but it's perfectly fine. He seems like a great officer, so go for it.
Okay, number 5, we're going to close. The controller says he's going to do a lateral appointment and put up for a,
Right.
okay, everybody okay with that?
I
So
read that
close-
email.
Close number 5?
Sure.
She got a counter offer.
Yes, yeah, so we're going to hire somebody, and they gave her a $5 raise and more benefits, so she didn't come. Next up is privilege of the floor for agenda items. Okay. Next up is the consent agenda. I'll present it as a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The only resolution was number 2. Close that out, Cooper.
Okay.
Items for special consideration. We got none. New and old business. Greg?
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
John?
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Brian?
I want to work on what I discussed and spend a lot of time on, which is how we can maybe formulate a group of people to look at affordable housing.
Like an implementation committee?
Giving everything else, it's not, giving everything else that we had looked into.
Well,
or I'd looked into.
The thing, I want to do it too. I do. My thing is, all right.
I want to look into affordable housing.
How do you want to do it?
I'm gonna present something.
Okay.
And we'll just take a look. I mean, there's grants out there to get, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to see if we can harness that and what it can be used for.
See, here's the thing with the affordable housing.
It's,
Downstate would be negotiated, and then.
well, let's talk about it.
You know what I'm saying?
I just want to continue the conversation. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You see where I'm going with that, Brian?
I do.
All right. Only thing I would like to talk about, Mr. Gabb, I just want to mention award system. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with ward systems, sure.
Let me ask you a question. What if I wanted to propose the town to go from 4 councilmen to 6? Is that permissible?
Sure.
Can we do that by public vote?
It's going to be subject to referendum.
I mean, like we voted on the House, can we get the people to vote on it on a ballot?
You're going to be required to get people to vote on it.
They have to vote on it.
Yeah.
Does the vote have to be on the November ballot? Can we set up a different date for that?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Can we set up a different date for a vote?
You can set a special election, sure.
We can do a special election for that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's expensive.
Why do you want to do that?
What do you mean, award system?
Yeah.
I'd like to do a award system because we have better, I'd like to have 6 awards. There was 3 things I'd like to do. The first thing I did, my first local law, was term limits, 2 4-year terms. My second thing I'd like to do is to go from 4 to 6 wards to give the town more equal representation. Right now, we just had an election for president, and in the town of Fishkill, the area that voted for President Trump has no town board member that lives in that section, the northeast quadrant of the town of Fishkill. Former Councilwoman Bardini was reelected for a 1-year term, and she lives in Dutchess Junction, which happens to be, if you looked at the population, would be overrepresented. So I would like to have more representation, and the big problem is when you campaign to run for office, it's very difficult when you do it by yourself. To canvass the town of Fishkill will probably take you about 5 months. If you had an award system, it'd probably take you about a month, and it would allow regular citizens to participate in the process without being owned by a political party or a developer or somebody money, a favor in the future. You could actually come on this board and do the right thing for the residents of Fishkill. My third thing, which I doubt happens, is I'd like to eliminate the full-time supervisor position, go to part-time, and have a town manager, which is either part controller or HR director for the same salary. That way you take politics out of the town hall. That's phase 3. So that's how I view the town of Fishkill in the future before I get out of here. John.
I'm just going to comment on the ward system. You do go to the mayors and supervisors dinners on every month.
Yes, I do.
I would be very interested to find out what the town supervisors feel in the town of Poughkeepsie, town of Wappinger, because I have spoken to some of the town board members from those towns who do have the ward system, and I think the feeling that I get that it becomes a match between my ward and Greg's ward and Brian's ward, and who's going to get what they, the way it is now when you run townwide, you're the town board for everybody. But I would just ask you to ask some questions.
I've already asked the supervisors, and they're not upset about that. They're upset that these councilmen have their little award system and they're there for 10, 15, 20 years. That's why I did term limits first, so you prevent that from happening. So that's the major thing where a board member could be powerful amongst themselves, because incumbency is an extreme advantage. And that's why you do term limits first, and then you do the award system after that. So that's my mentality. Listen, I could be wrong. People could vote against it. And the reason I would like to have a special election, so it doesn't become a political thing next November. It's either you're coming out for the award system, yes or no, and that's the only thing on the ballot. Whereas if we put this on the November ballot, one side's going to say yes, one side's going to say no. They're going to use it to their advantage. I want it to be as apolitical as possible. That's why I'm asking you these questions.
Well, I know we'll have more debate at another time, so I'm not going to go into it, but I have a lot of reservations, but we'll wait for another opportunity to talk about it.
That's all I got.
I want to say one more thing. Yeah. So if you're going away out of town for Thanksgiving, you can go on our police web page, and you can register your home as being gone, and then the police will try to make a special attempt to come by and cruise your house and make sure everything is okay. So look on the police web page for that, for registering your home if you're going away.
Yeah, Councilman Rye, that's a great service for the residents of Fishkill. Yeah. I implore you to do that. I'm a retired police officer in the town of Bedford. We call it the dark, back then we didn't have computers, we call it a dark house book, where the cop on his tour would go once or twice to an empty house to make sure nothing was going on there, and occasionally you would find things that shouldn't have been happening, and you nip it right in the bud. So it's a great service that the town offers, and our police department is great, and Councilman Rye is offering a great suggestion that you should take them up on. Our next town board meeting is December 4th. We are going to executive session to discuss litigation.
To seek confidential advice of counsel.
Confidential advice of counsel. So I'll make a there'll be no business or vote after this. Right. So You don't have to worry about that, so I'll make a motion to leave the regular course of business and go into executive session. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. God bless America.
God bless.